This conference will now be recorded.
Hello everyone, welcome back. So welcome to our day 23 in our GCP Cloud Architect training. So last week we saw about IAP secure SSH option where without an external IP address, how through tunneling we can do SSH in GCP. So which was really a cool feature. We saw that and we also explored a few other concepts last week about the firewall rules, the routes to some extent. So this week we'll explore more about internal IPs. How do you reserve an IP? Uh, is internal IP charged or not? What is an external IP address? How the billing happens? All those things. And what are the things which you should do as a design principle when it comes to external IP address? So we'll do the second part of it now. So we had finished IAP SSH option. There's one more thing in IAP which is HTTPS, which we'll do towards the demo, towards the end of tomorrow's class mostly. Okay, so let's do this part. IP address. Why do you need to reserve an IP address? What's going to be the advantage? Okay, so let me create a virtual machine. So this is my VPC. So we had this batch 6 custom VPC already, and VPC Taiwan we had last week itself. I have added specifically one more VPC in Taiwan called as VPC Taiwan. Let me just zoom this a bit. Okay, so VPC Taiwan 2 is what I have added. So just for a demonstration purpose. Now what we'll do is we'll create a virtual machine standard way. So we'll create a virtual machine. And we'll use a template, and I'll just create a virtual machine and show you. Simple, nothing fancy here, but just wanted to highlight something and show you. So I'm going to use my template. Done. Internal IP not reserved. That's it, folks. That's the stuff. I'm going to just leave everything as default. So this is going to use basically the VPC which we have, batch 6. Uh, you see this internal IP address. It is by default ephemeral, short-lived. Similarly, external IP address is also ephemeral. What is the key indication is if you create a virtual machine, the IP, internal IP address and external IP address, if you have the privilege to have an external IP address, it's going to be ephemeral. Both are going to be ephemeral by default. So let me click on create. So let's wait for it to come up. So you see this internal IP address, the external IP address, all good. Now I'll just take a screenshot just for our reference so that we know what has happened. So I'm just going to take a screenshot. Keep it handy for our next demonstration. So standard VM created, that's it. Now let me just stop it. Let me just stop it for a while and see what is going to happen. So I'm going to stop this VM, not deleting it, just stopping it. The moment I stop it, right, what's going to happen? The first and the foremost thing is the external IP address is going to be totally removed, because external IP address is basically an IPv4 address, and IPv4 address is limited. So if you look into this thing, so it's only a 32-bit address. So 2 power 32 is going to be close to something like uh, 4 billion if I'm not wrong. So if I just do quickly 2 power 32, 4 billion, and at least as of today the entire population in the world is around 8 billion. So this is not going to suffice. So usually the cloud providers have a pool of reserved IPs which they keep whenever they want to allocate it. So that's the reason whenever you have an external IP address, which is by default, it's ephemeral. The moment you stop the VM, it's going to be sent back, or it's going to be put back into the pool. And specifically, they are going to have pool of IPs in every region. So Singapore is going to have a specific set of pool. So that's the reason usually if you create something in a specific region, the IP is going to be usually different. So in Singapore, it's going to be usually 35, 34 series. And in US Central, if you do, it's going to be usually something like 130 or so, usually. So that's what you see. But the moment you stop it, the IP address is gone. The external IP address is gone. The internal IP address is going to be there, same. And you want to do it again, it's going to come up with the same IP address. Now, one important thing to note here is if you have a requirement of reserving your external IP address, you have to basically first reserve the IP address and then use it. Or if it's already provisioned, go and make it as static. So, but if you stop it and you want to now, for example, it may be a coincidence. Now, if I start my VM, I may get back the same IP address. It can be just a coincidence. That's it. But remember this. If you stop a VM with an external IP address and it is ephemeral, the same IP is not going to come. So what is so important about this IP address? If you have shared this external IP address with somebody, or it has been updated in your or used as a record in your DNS, then you have to change it. You have to change it. So that's the reason if you are going to use this IP address in your DNS, which we have not talked, we will talk about that. Then it is very, very important you make this as external IP address. At the same time, you should not use always external IP address that to reserve it. The reason is Google has a different billing model for external IP address. Internal IP address, as per my understanding, is totally free of cost. But if you have an external IP address, it's going to cost you. And if it is being used by a virtual machine, the cost is going to be different. But if it's not used, the cost is going to be totally different. So let me just show you that price part. So one instance, I want one instance. I will make it as the smallest one, F1 micro. Oh, let me just little zoom this. Yeah, F1 micro. Now you see a specific section here, folks. Instances using ephemeral public IP address. Instances using static public IP address. So let me put, I want an ephemeral IP address. So everything standard, one virtual machine with F1 micro in US Central. Default, I'm just left it. Click on add to estimate. So you will come to know basically major portion of the cost goes to your external IP address itself. So total cost itself is $3, $6, 6.8. So major portion goes to your IP address itself, ephemeral IP address. This is ephemeral. Now let me just make a note of this, or maybe I can have a new pricing calculator. I'll add this as this thing. I'll call this as static IP, which does not change. Basically, you reserve it. So one and add one static IP. You see the difference? You don't see any difference if it is an ephemeral public IP address running 24/7, 30 days or 31 days. And if it's a static IP also, it is the same. So the moment it has been attached to a virtual machine, the cost is going to be remaining the same. But what's going to happen if the VM is stopped? The VM is stopped, or the VM is totally deleted. Forget about stopped. Instead of stopping, if it's deleted, you have reserved the external IP address, right? That's going to be charged at an hourly rate. So if I just go to my another pricing calculator, so networking, load balancing and here. So under load balancing and network service, there is a specific price for here. IP addresses, by default it's external IP address, internal IP address is free. Unused IP address. So if I just put one, you see if you have an external IP address and it is not been used, just reserved but not used, you'll be charged roughly around 7.3 US dollars per month. Not even for using it, you will be charged. So I have seen few customers where they have reserved it, um, but they forgot to use it. They will be heavily charged. So this is basically to avoid the practice of reserving it, because we have a small pool. IPv4 address are very limited. So if you reserve it and don't use it, Google charges them. So this is just to avoid that practice of reserving and not using it. So the whole reason why I shared this information is, if you have a virtual machine with external IP address, if you are using it, the external IP address or the external IP address can be ephemeral or static. It's not going to make any difference to your price. It's going to be the same thing. So, and if you're going to use it always, better reserve it. The reason is, there could be a chances where you need to shut down the VM for some maintenance or anything. The moment you shut down and bring it up, the IP address is going to change and you'll be in trouble. So better, if you decide this VM is going to run always continuously, make it as a static IP address. But the moment you know this VM is not going to be required anymore, make sure the IP address is also removed from the reserved one. Otherwise, you'll be charged heavily. Now, let me go back and start this VM and see whether we'll get the same IP address or not. Because it's ephemeral, so let's see whether it's going to get the same IP address or not. We have the screenshot for our reference. It may come same. It could be coincidence only, folks, not always. In our case, it's a coincidence. It's coming as same. It's coming as same, but not always it's going to be. Not always it's going to be the same thing. So please keep that in mind. So unfortunately, this same in our case, it is same. Now, but this is ephemeral. This is ephemeral. How do I know it? Very simple. Go to your VPC external IPs. External IP address. If you go and see it, you will see this basically. The same IP address. You see it? It's the same IP address used in Singapore region. And look at the type. It is ephemeral. It is ephemeral. Now, if you want to make it static, it's very simple. Just click on this static. Just give a name. My static IP. That's it. This is going to be reserved. Now, what is the advantage of reserving it is, say for example, tomorrow this VM is not at all booting up, some issue. So there's no other way, only to restore it from a snapshot and create a new VM altogether, totally new. So at that time, using this reserved IP, which you have reserved, it's going to come up. So only you do the backend work. So in your DNS, all those things, it's going to remain the same IP address. So you don't have much changes to be done there. So that's how you can use this reserved IP. So restoring the VM with the same IP address, all those things, this reserved IP is going to be really helpful there. So really helpful. So let me just try deleting it. Let me try deleting it. Sorry, cancel. Let me delete this. And create a new IP, create a new virtual machine. And I'll show you how I can use my reserved external IP address or a static IP address to be in very, very simple terms. Create a VM from the template. Using reserved external IP. Now, if you see the IP address, which you see, these are regional, folks. These are regional. It is in Singapore only. So meaning only in Singapore, if you create another virtual machine, you can use this IP address because it is currently not used by anything. So this kind of a stuff, if I just leave it, it's going to be charged at an hourly rate, at an hourly rate. If it's attached, it's going to be per second billing, like a virtual machine. So that's a huge difference there. So make sure you monitor this external IP address which is not used by anything. So if it's not used by, release it or use it, but just don't leave it lying down there. Otherwise, you'll be charged heavily. So if I keep it as Singapore and go to my networking, I can use, instead of an ephemeral external IP address, I can use, is it the same thing? Singapore. Yeah. Maybe I have to refresh the screen. It should show. It should show there is one of the external IP address available. You can use it if you want. So if I just go to my networking, yeah, you see this? By default, if you don't want, make it none, external IP address, or the default option. So if you don't want, you make it as none. The default is ephemeral, or if you want specifically a external IP address, like existing one, use this. Or you want to say, I want to create something new right now, you create a new one. So this is going to be another reserved IP. So you can use a VM with an external IP address now. So that is possible. Let me just create it. And let's look at the command line, which is going to help us use this. So you see, you mention a flag called as address. This is going to be the external IP address, which is reserved already. Let me just create this. And now I'm very much sure my external IP address is going to be the same. But my internal IP address is not going to be the same because you did not reserve that. Internal IP address also can be reserved, and there is no penalty for not using it. So because it's internal, right? So you can reserve it, not use it. That's all okay. That's all okay. So where this advantage of reserving an internal IP address comes is, say for example, if you stop the VM, now if I stop the VM, both internal and external IP address are going to remain the same. Now if you say, if I stop it and start it back again, I'm going to have the same IP address, then why should I reserve an internal IP address? You may have a question there. For external IP address, it's totally understood, because with the moment you stop it, if it's an ephemeral IP address, it's going to be released back to the pool. uh, but internal IP address stays there, so why should I reserve it? So say for example, take a scenario where there is a software which is licensed to a internal IP address. So usually some softwares are licensed to an IP address, attached or bind to an IP address. Only if the IP address is this, it's going to work. So in that case, assume in this VM only you had installed that software, and unfortunately that software has or that VM has some issue, and you don't want to spend time fixing the VM. Rather than that, you say, anyway, I have a snapshot, I will create a new virtual machine, or I have a custom image, I'll use a custom image and quickly bring it up. So in cloud, people don't spend time debugging what's went wrong in an existing VM. So you have lots of options. image machine is Google image machine equivalent to your AMI is there, custom image is there, snapshot is there. So people usually use a quick way to restore it instead of just logging in and troubleshooting what went wrong. Okay, so if that is the case, what they will do is they will reserve this IP address. So this VM is not at all working. That is something very clear to us. It's not working. So what we will do is reserve this IP address so that we will use the same IP address when we create an new virtual machine, restoring it from a snapshot, a custom image, or from a Google machine image, and use the static IP address. So that way my software is going to start working as expected. So that's the advantage of reserving it internal IP address. There's no cost implication uh, when it comes to internal, but when it is used by a specific some other resource specifically using this IP address, or maybe you may have an internal DNS setting so with the same IP, so then reserving makes more sense. So how do we reserve it? Basically, uh, let me see if it's already created. How do I reserve it? I've never tried it if it's stopped, but let me give a try. So if I just go to my networking, uh, internal IP, never tried this option, but let me give a try. Go to my VPC. This is the VPC which I'm using. Now I cannot use this VM. It cannot be used anymore because it's not coming up. It's having issue. External IP address anyway I have reserved it, so I have no issues. But this internal IP address I have not reserved it. So let me see if I can reserve it. Uh, internal IP address, reserve static. Uh, if it's during the creation, yeah, I guess during the creation only I can reserve it. 1 minute, 1 minute. Uh, not sure whether it's only during the creation I can do it. Let me just do once. I have to reserve it. Reserve a static IP, but okay, let me try doing this. Reserve, reserve internal. So how do I came to here? This is slightly different. So I'll just show you one more time. So I have this internal IP. So I'm trying to reserve this because if I delete it, again, I'm not going to get the same IP. So the IP which I'm going to get is going to be basically 192.168.1.14 because of your dynamic host configuration protocol, DHCP, because of that. And it's going to get renewed every 24 hours. So you may try to use the same IP only after 24 hours. So if you want the same IP, better reserve it. So let me show you how to reserve it. So to reserve it, come to VPC, click on the specific VPC which this VM is using, which you can come to know by looking at the network section in the VM. Then you have lots of tabs here. Static internal IP address. There's nothing currently reserved. Let me reserve one. So I'll call this as batch 6 internal IP. It is in subnetwork Singapore. Let me choose. I'll say let me choose, and I will use this IP address, folks. I'll use this IP address. Now click on save, and this is the first time I'm doing this option. Let me see whether I can reserve it. Good, I have reserved it. Awesome. And it also shows it's currently being used by this VM. Currently used by this VM. Now this VM had an issue, so I cannot use this anymore. So I'm going to say bye bye to this. Totally remove this. Let me take a screenshot before we forget it. So this is a new VM which we had issues, which is not starting up. So I'm going to say I'm not going to spend time, and that is what I have seen as a trend, folks. People don't do it like in on-prem. You have a virtual machine, something is not working, so we'll bring in experts to fix it. But in cloud, you don't need to do it. So don't spend time debugging what went wrong in the VM. To debug it, if it takes 5 minutes, debug it. But to debug entire thing, it's going to take 2 hours. I would suggest not to debug it, rather restore it from a backup. That's going to be the better option, and you get that luxury in cloud. So use that approach. It's slightly a different approach. If it's in on-prem, you don't have any more servers, so you have to use that server only, fix it. But here you get n number of servers. You can reserve it and you can see it. So now let me create a VM. Now I'm going to restore back with the same internal IP, same external IP address, so that they are not going to see any change itself, the end users. So uh, okay, let me use a template. New VM uh, reserved using in reserved or static. Let's use static internal external IP. Both are reserved. So how do I use that? Just go to your networking. So when you expand your internal IP address, by default it's going to be ephemeral automatic. Now you see your batch 6 internal IP, or you can reserve it on the fly also if you want. So I'm going to use the one which I reserved it, and I'm going to use the reserved IP, external IP address which I did it. So both are going to be the static one or the reserved one which you did. Go ahead and create it. It's going to come up with the same IP address. So if I just see my screenshot, let's wait for the VM to come up. Okay, now you see this stuff, folks. The VM name is totally different. That's okay, but my IP address is same. If I had started a new IP address, started a new virtual machine, it would be a different IP address totally. It's going to be 192.168.1.14 usually. Because I use an internal IP address, it came up. Similarly with my external IP address. So is this part clear, folks? The importance of reserving it and making sure you use that effectively and effectively. So an external IP address, be very cautious. Sometimes I have done few blunders. I can share you that one of the blunders which I had done, right? So there is a recommendation option, right? So there was a built-in recommendation option. Recommendation, click OK. So it sometimes shows you can save some X number of dollars because this VM is not heavily utilized. Restart it or change the machine type from something to something, downgrade it. You can save this X number of dollars. So it's going to be really tempting to do that. So I have done in the beginning, but without taking into consideration, if I restart it, the IP address is going to change, because the IP address at that time when I configured it was all ephemeral. So when I restart it, I'm going to get a new IP address, and people is going to start yelling at us or yelling at me saying that why a new IP address, what happened? So whenever you see some recommendations where you wanted to change it and your VM has an external IP address, make sure you go and reserve it. Go and reserve it, then restart it, so that you will get the same IP address. Okay, so any questions on this, folks? Is that clear? Is there any questions on this part? Reserving the internal IP address and the external IP address, the advantage of it. Good. Thanks, folks. Got it. Now let me just delete it. Just delete it. And whenever you have deleted a VM which has an external IP address which is reserved, please make sure you release it back. You release that back also. So how to release it? Let me just show. First, let me just delete this. Good, release. Now if I go to my VPC, first let me show the internal IP address. Static internal IP address. You see currently it is not used by anything, meaning this can be used by a new virtual machine in Singapore region. You can do it, and the reserving is going to be basically in this in the CIDR range which the subnetwork has been configured. So we know Singapore subnetwork is with the range 192, so it's going to, you can reserve it in that range basically. And if I go to my external IP address, it's going to show currently used by none. So if you see something like this, make sure you click and release it, and you get a G-Cloud equivalent of that also. So make sure you release this back to the pool so that you will not be charged at an hourly rate. Good. This is a good thing. Now, one last thing I wanted to show you. Now, there is a requirement. Let's take the same example, a software which runs basically with a IP address, with an IP address like 192.168.100.200, something like this. This is the license bind to an IP address. I have used such softwares. You would have also heard of it. You would have also used it. So licensed binded to this IP. Now, if you want to do something of this sort, by looking at the IP address, you'll come to know it's going to be internal IP address. So what you should basically do is you should have a subnetwork which is going to have this kind of a range, basically a class C CIDR range. If you give it, you should be able to do it. Now, how do I specifically do this in the when I'm creating a virtual machine? Let me just show you. Reserving internal IP address and specifically the IP which I want. So licensed software. Let me use the template. Licensed software, and go to my networking, and it is good that I have put it in the same CIDR range. So what is the requirement? This is the requirement, right? So I can just get this details that this is the IP address I want. Now, during my internal IP address creation, I'm going to mention basically reserve a static internal IP address and give a name, something like XYZ software, and there are two options: assign automatically or let me choose. So if I do let me choose, what's the problem? Single. Okay, this. Okay, so sorry, it should be this one because my CIDR range is only this. So I have put it as /24 as a subnetwork mask, right? Something of this sort. So if I had put my subnetwork mask as 192.168 dot 0.0/16, then I could have used the 100. But what we have done is our subnetwork mask. If I just show you, our subnetwork mask is /24. Only the last 24 bits, last 8 bits are going to change. So the first 24 bits are going to be same. So let me just make a small modification here. The IP is bound to this. So how I'm going to do it? Just put that IP and it's going to be reserved. So now I'm very much sure my new VM which is going to be created, it's going to have an internal IP address which is this one. Okay. So I have not explored this part, folks. You can explore it. After you shared it, the IP address can be used on different front ends up to 50 times. Can be shared on 50 front ends. So, okay, never explored this option actually. After you have selected share, the IP address can be used on different front ends up to 50 times. Okay, never tried it. Actually, what they mean by front end also not striking me. That's fine. So let me click on reserve. What's going to happen is the VM is going to have this. So done. That's the IP address. Let's click on the command line. So now you see basically if it's an external IP address, the parameter is going to be basically hyphen address. If it's an internal IP address which you have reserved, it's going to be hyphen private network equal to the IP address. Okay, so that's what you can see basically. There's a question. Let me just finish this and answer it. Create a VM. Now when I see, I'm 300% sure the VM is going to have 192.168.1.200 is what is my IP address. I'm pretty much sure about that. It shows that. There's a question from Vivek. Can we reserve the IPs if this IP range is not present in our VPC? Yeah. Say for example, if the software, as long as it's an internal IP address, I can create it. Unless I have not used it in any of the subnetworks or anything. I can use it. So that should not be a problem because you have full control, right, to your internal IP. So you should be able to do it. So say for example, if the license is not to this one, but specifically to some other RFC 1918 standard, you can use 192, 172.16, something of this sort. Now, if you see this kind of a range, you don't have it. You don't have this kind of a range. Now what you can do, assume it has to be in Singapore only. They want this kind of an IP. Then what I will do is I'll just go here to my subnet VPC, add a new subnetwork. Let me add a new subnetwork. I'll call this as subnet SG licensed software. And I'm going to choose basically Singapore. Now, what's that IP which I had? This one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this as /24. Now I create a subnetwork. Now I should be able to create a VM in that range which you are asking for. So let's just wait for the the subnetwork to create. What was that? 1 minute. Failed. Okay, 1 minute. Let me try it one more time. SG licensed. What's the issue? Let me try adding it. Failed with unknown error. Okay. Is it creating? Okay, it is creating. Oh, it got created. I'm trying to create it again. Okay. Now I have this subnetwork. Now you can reserve it, right? Vivek, hope that is clear. So if the subnetwork is not there, create the subnetwork. As long as it's an RFC 1918 standard, you should be able to do that. That's it. That's it. So let me just delete this VM. And if you want to remove the reserved IP, internal IP address also, you can reserve it. Delete it. It's not going to incur any cost. Based on my understanding, it's not going to incur any cost. Only the VM which you create, what are the activities this VM does, based on that you will have a charge. But just reserving an internal IP address is not going to be charged. So maybe if you have this thing requirement that there's going to be a software which will be procured and that software is going to use a specific IP address, you have already released the PO order, they are processing it, but there's a delay in coming in. what you can do is basically come when the VPC is created, make sure that IP address is reserved so that no other VMs use that. So that way you can do it. So let me release it back. So that's about how do you basically reserve, play around with that static internal IP address, static external IP address. What you should do basically is what we saw. Uh, Now let's do a small thought, time to think here. So if we have a service, so say for example, if you have a one service, maybe some kind of an Apache web server or some internal middle tier application running on a VM, you can reference it using the primary IP address. So you just use the primary IP address, you should be able to get that. So just access it, you should be able to get it easy. um, Assume it's a middle tier application for simplicity reason. So you don't have an external IP address for it, but you have an internal IP. You want to refer it, it's fine. But if you in the same virtual machine, this virtual machine is little powerful machine, um, where there are multiple microservices running. So, and each microservice you want to address by a different internal IP address. So let me just try to show you what is this we are trying to do here. So for this, let me take this example. Um, GitHub microservice GCP. This is a nice diagram actually. Okay, this is the diagram, which is an e-commerce website. Okay, so just for now, assume this entire stuff, product catalog, these are all microservices, meaning as an end user, I log in to their website to the front end microservice, which is going to then call other microservice. So assume you log into Amazon website or Flipkart. uh, you log in. Once you log in, you will get a list of products, right? Electronics, electricals, home appliances, all those things you will get it. Then you will have some recommendations. So then you want to check it out, some ads, payment gateway, all those things. So these are all different microservices. Assume for a minute all these microservices, front end microservice, product catalog, recommendation service, all are running in the same powerful virtual machine, one single virtual machine. uh, Now you want to address your product catalog front end, and this product catalog is never going to be accessed directly from outside world. It is going to be always from your front end. So when front end calls a product catalog, you want to call basically product catalog, product catalog service, right? Service. It may be something like 172.16.1.100. This is the IP you want to call it internally. Recommendation service. We have not come to DNS, folks. We'll come to DNS. For now, we will use the IP address itself. So recommendation service, you want to use a different IP, one. So that way, individual microservices, you want to call it in different internal IP address, but everything is running in the same virtual machine. So any thoughts, something like this, you have tried it in the past? How do you use it? Basically, this is hinting towards something. So uh, this kind of a stuff, microservices based architecture, when we hear microservice, the first thing which could be really helpful is there's a specific service which could be really helpful. But if you were to do it on a single virtual machine, how do you do it? Any thoughts, folks? Hope you understood the requirement. You understood the requirement. Any thoughts for this? Any thoughts, folks? Folks, am I audible? Today it looks like you people are a little quiet. Not sure what's the reason. Okay. Multiple nicks. If I add multiple nicks, uh, possible option to put multiple nicks, but each nick is going to be in a different VPC, right? So if I put like this, so that's another option. Uh, uh, what about the same IP but different port? People will get confused with the ports because everything is web based. Assume everything is web based, so that's a possible option, Deepak Bandari. So I can make so what Deepak is saying is, instead of this, use the primary IP address itself. If the primary IP address is 68.1.10, so this is the primary IP address. This is 8080. This is one option which Deepak Bhandari is suggesting. 8081. You keep on doing this. So this could be good, but sometimes people get confused. Oh, I have to remember the port. If I do a wrong thing, it's going to become problem. So, but here everything is going to be port 80. So they don't need to play around with the 80 port. It's going to be a little easier, basically. Uh, if I use multiple network interface, so NIC, then what's going to happen is, so each network interface is going to be one specific VPC. At least in GCP, you cannot have, for example, if I go to my, for example, for example, if I create a VM with two network interface card, let me try to show what Vivek is trying to say. So if I create a VM in Taiwan, so I can use VPC Taiwan, I can use VPC Taiwan 2. But the moment I use VPC Taiwan 2, I can only use one of the subnetworks. So two networks are going to be coming into picture. So it's going to be an overhead, because if I were to make communication happening between multiple things, for example, recommendation and product should communicate. If recommendation, service, and product catalog should communicate, and in your implementation you have done a multiple NIC, what is that which you need to do so that it works, folks? What is that extra thing which you need to do? So let me just show you what is this, what Vivek is trying to share. So let me just share you this. Let me create a VM. So VM with multiple network interface card, NIC. So I'll put it in Taiwan. I'll use little powerful machine. Now if I go to my networking, I see Taiwan. I see these are the VPCs which I have in my project. In batch 6 VPC, I don't have any subnetwork for Taiwan. So I use VPC Taiwan. It shows me that subnetwork. I don't need an external IP address for now. So this is my one network interface added. You want to add one more NIC, you can add it. The moment I add multiple NIC, firewall rules cannot be set. You have to go manually set it. That's another drawback which you see. Now let me add VPC Taiwan 2. Now either I can choose subnetwork Taiwan 2 or subnetwork Taiwan 3. Either one of them. Let me select this one. No external IP address. Now I have a VM which has two internal IP address. If external IP address provision, you are going to have two external IP address. So I'm going to have two IPs, folks. Two IPs. Now, if I create this, and you can create up to 8 NICs like this, as Vivek mentioned, but you need to have 8 VPCs. You have to have 8 VPCs. You cannot, so once you use one NIC, one NIC is going to be equivalent to one network interface. Sorry, one NIC is equivalent to your one VPC. So you cannot use the same VPC for another. So meaning you should have minimum 8 VPCs to completely utilize it. But the contradicting thing is, if you see by default in a project, you get only 5 VPCs. 5 VPCs. So now the VM is created. If I click on this VM, you see two NIC folks, NIC 0, NIC 1. So you can go up to NIC 7. NIC 7. So I have two IPs. Now, and both are in two different networks. Now, if you have put a recommendation service in this and product catalog in this, how will these two network communicate each other using internal IP, folks? You need to have again peering there, right? So if they were to communicate also, you need to have peering. So I can just show you this. This is going to be really little fun. So let me just ping it. So you're going to have that overhead. You have to have the firewall rule. Everything is going to come. So let me just show you that. Now, if I put IP space A, I'll see I have two network interface card. This is my first one, and the second one is this one. Now, even though it is in the same virtual machine, right? It's attached to the same virtual machine. This is the most fun part, folks. Let me just ping. Okay, I can ping this. How do I do the other one? This should also ping is my understanding, but I wanted to show two things. How do I do that? Maybe I have to use another VM basically to ping. How do I use that? How do I use that? Ping works here. Can I communicate easily? Uh, this one will have one issue which I seen. Maybe if I use, let's add one more VM which feeds some which front end product catalog. This thing is there. If we make this front end in some other VM, and you have to do the peering there. So let me just show you this. Instance front end, instance front end, Taiwan. So either I had to put it in, if I, for front end, I don't want multiple NIC, I put it in VPC's Taiwan, and because it's a front end, it's going to have some external IP address. So let's leave it as external IP address. Now create this one. Let me wait for this VM to come. It's in Taiwan. So SSH. So let me put the screen like this. So on the left hand side, I have the machine with multiple NIC, which has recommendation service and product catalog service. Here on my right hand side, I have the front end service. Let me see how I can access it. Okay, so I have my front end service IP space A. Now the front end should be able to communicate with my recommendation. So the recommendation, this is the IP, one IP. So because both are in VPC Taiwan, this is going to work. This is going to work. Now, if I try to use this IP, which is Taiwan 2, the product catalog service, the other service basically, it's not going to work. The reason is it's a different network. So you have to do VPC peering, you have to set up the firewall rule. It's going to make the things much complicated if you go with multiple NIC. Okay, so with multiple network interface, if you try to do it, it's going to have an issue. And in a virtual machine in GCP with a specific configuration, minimum N1 standard 1, you can add up to 8 network interface. 8 network interface, but that's not going to help us in this case. And there's one more option which Vivek mentions, one load balancer, multiple URL path. We have not come to load balancer. Definitely something possible with that. For now, we will use a different option. So we will use a different, oh, this part is clear, folks. Is this part clear? Multiple network interface concept, which was not part of our this thing, but since it came up, I just thought of sharing it with you. So you can add multiple network interface, but when you add multiple network interface, it has to be only during the creation. So please note that you cannot add a new network interface after the VM is created. So only during the creation stage, when you're creating it, you have to do it. So this is not going to work, is very clear. And because two networks are going to come, VPC peering, something of that sort is required. Now, a better option, very simplistic option, which is going to be, which we have not learned, but I wanted to give you a scenario when you should use this. So let me just delete this. One of the possible options, we have not learned it, folks, we have not learned it, but if you have such kind of a scenario, one possible option which you can use is something called as alias IPs. So what is this alias IP basically? So this helps you to assign multiple IPs, internal IPs, to your virtual machine, uh, to the same network interface card. So you have only one NIC 0, but you can have multiple internal IP address allocated. How you can have it? You can basically assign it from a pool or from a range, and the range can be two kinds of ranges. You can have a primary range. That's your primary the subnetwork's primary address range which you have. Secondary thing you can also add, you can also add a secondary range. So in this example, if you see, you have a primary internal address. So your subnetwork is going to be 10.1.0.0 slash 16, something like that. You can also, so if you have this is the one. Now you can also have a secondary IP range, which is going to be 10.2.0.0 slash 20. So your VMs can have multiple IPs using the same network interface. And this is heavily used in Kubernetes. Whenever you create your pods and services, right? This is going to be automatically creating a secondary IP range automatically. So the advantage here is you can have multiple IPs in the same network interface, and because it is in the same network interface, I should not have any problem communicating with it. No VPC peering, nothing. It's going to work very easily for me, basically. Heavily used in Kubernetes automatically. So we have also done Kubernetes demo. So when we did it in a specific default VPC or something in a specific region, for that specific region, the subnetwork, you would have already seen a secondary IP range created. So let me show you that once we come back from a 10 minutes break. So where I'll show you how you can create a secondary IP range. You can have n number of ranges. One is going to be called as a primary range, which you create during your VPC creation. So if you see here, let me take this one itself. So Taiwan, subnetwork Taiwan. What you see, this is your primary range. If you want to add a secondary range, edit, you can add a secondary IP range. So this is at your subnetwork level. Once you have a secondary range, this can be used by your VM, by your Kubernetes cluster to use it for a specific purpose. In Kubernetes, it's going to be for allocating for your pods, for your services. Or if it's a VM, like the one which we saw, so you can have different IPs for different services easily. So with the help of provisioning a secondary range and using that range in your VM as a alias IP. So in VM, when you create it is called as alias IP, and in your subnetwork, when you do it, it's going to be called as basically a secondary IP range. People usually get confused here, so that's the reason I wanted to make it very clear. So in your VPC level, you create a secondary range. In your VM level, you create an alias IP. And one important thing to note is you can assign the alias IP either from a primary range. So meaning you already have a primary subnetwork, you want to use the same range uh, as an alias IP. So that is also possible. Or if you say let's not conflict between primary and secondary, let's use primary for the main and any alias IPs we are going to use secondary. That's going to be better. So but possibilities are there. Both the possible options are there. So if things are not clear, don't worry. When I show you the demonstration, it's going to become very clear how you create a secondary IP range, how you use it as an alias IP. So before we do that, take a 10 minutes break, come back, and once you come back, we will do a demonstration, one with virtual machine, one with a Kubernetes cluster. Okay. So let me stop the recording.
This conference will now be recorded.
So before the break, we tried to understand the concept of the alias IP, which basically using which I can assign using a concept I can use actually using the secondary range or the primary range, I can assign alias IP is what we saw. So let's see this in action first, and how the same example which we saw front end in a different virtual machine, product catalog, recommendation service, currency, all those things in another powerful virtual machine, how they can communicate using different IPs. We'll try to see it, okay, by doing a small demonstration. So first of all, what I wanted to show is make this line very clear. You can assign, this is just a copy paste from the documentation, folks. You can assign VM's IP, so you can assign VM alias IP from either subnet's primary range or subnetwork's secondary range. So if you see, all our subnetworks does not have a secondary range itself. All they have is only a primary range. Now let me try to create first a VM with alias IP just using the primary range. Let me just show you that. How do I do it? Also, I'll show you. So create a VM using the template. I'll call this as alias IP using primary range. I'll change it to Taiwan. Any zone is okay. I go to my networking, change my, because there's no subnetwork in batch 6, that's the reason it shows always that error message. But if you switch to basically VPC Taiwan, it shows you the stuff basically. Now this is your internal IP address. So this is going to be your 10.5.4. something is going to be your internal IP address. If you want, you can reserve it, you can do all those things. Now if you just click on this option, you get this. You can have an alias IP. Now whether you want to take it from which range. You have only one range, which is your primary range. So from this itself also you can have it. So I can say 10 dot 5 dot 4 dot 100. This is my so I can give a specific IP like /32, or I can give it as, if you see the help itself, /24. So either one of them. So it should be either /24 or /32. /32 means it's fixed. /24 means the last 8 bit is going to be available for your IPs. So this is my alias IP. So meaning when I finish this creation of the VM, go and log in and type. There's a question, sorry. How do you decide this range, or I can give anything? So this range, right? If you are using primary subnetwork range, it has to be part of the CIDR. It cannot be outside of it. I cannot use 192.168.1 dot 1.20. I cannot use this. It should belong to the range, Mangesh. So it should belong to the range. So it should be part of your range which you have done. We are here, we are using the primary range. So it has to be part of 10.5.4.0/24. Does that answer your question? 5.4.100. This is what I say. Now I can add n number of ranges if you want. So similarly, you want to add one more 10.5.4.200. So totally my VM, once I create the VM and do IP space A, it should show me totally three IPs. One is the primary IP, two the alias IPs. Okay, so go ahead and let's create it. And I don't want an external IP address, so only internal. That's it. You can create it, but I don't want to incur that cost. Basically, we know without external IP address also we can do good amount of work. So why do you want to have an external IP address? By the time you finish in networking, you will totally avoid external IP address. So let's wait for it. We have only one NIC. We have only one NIC. Done. So this is my primary internal IP address. Now if I click on this VM details, you'll see this alias IPs. So it's going to have two. Maybe I can assign this to my recommendation service and this to my product catalog if you want. Basically, let me just SSH and show you that it has three IPs. By the time this comes up, let me create a VM called as front end service. So let me just create quickly a front end service in the same VPC. So that you know that it's going to work. The same demo which we did with multiple NICs did not work, but with alias IP it's going to work front end. So I'm going to put it in Taiwan. I have to use the same VPC. That's it. For this, if you want, you can have an external IP address because it's going to have the presence, outside presence. Outside people should access this VM, so external IP address is required. I'm going to give that. Done. So I don't need this recommendation column. I'm going to remove this. So I'll SSH into the front end. So the left hand side I have is my VM which I have used IP alias. All the three IPs are belonging to the same subnetwork. Yes, basically, yes. Now if I hit and sorry, IP space A, you should see you see the primary IP range. You see the primary IP range. For the secondary IP range, I don't see it. There's a specific command in the routing table. You have to do it. Even though if you don't get it, I'll show you how I can ping it and show. So I'm in my front end. So I'll copy this IP address and show you ping. It works. The primary IP address. That's fine. Now, if I go to my listing, the alias IPs details. So this is one IP, right? So if I do this ping from my front end, it's going to work. It's going to work. Similarly, there's a question. I'll finish this and answer it. Similarly, if I do 200, it's going to work. Now you may say because it's a subnetwork, everything is going to ping. No. If I do something like 201, I don't have any VM with that. So now only one VM, multiple IPs, alias IPs basically, I can assign it to multiple services and call it from my front end. Simple, right? Straightforward solution. So you don't have much to tweak around or anything. So there's one question from Anil Kumar. So we don't get a security of subnetwork features. So we don't get the security of the subnetwork features. So what is that security of the subnetwork feature, Anil Kumar? I did not get it. So did not get that. What was that actually? I did not understand the question.
So basically, what I mean to say, if you have different subnets, each subnet will have its own IP range, right? And that way, each service is protected under its own subnet.
Okay. Basically, okay, the subnetwork, when you see in GCP, right? If you have VMs in two different subnetworks, so I have VM created in subnetwork Taiwan 2, VM Taiwan subnetwork Taiwan 3, they will communicate each other. You don't have that extra thing. Like this is not the traditional one. If you do it in subnetwork, you can block all those things. So the moment it is in one VPC, you can communicate it. So you don't put firewall rule at a subnetwork level, you put it at a VPC level, right? This is slightly different. We discussed this, right? So this is different from your traditional networking where you do everything. If there are two VMs in two different subnetworks, they may not interact itself, right? But here they work. They work because the VPC is global, the subnetwork is a regional resource. So that should not be a problem, basically. So if you want to totally avoid it, basically you have to basically play around with your routes, not to do. That's how you do it. Now this part clear, folks? There's one command which I don't remember where I can get my alias IPs also. There's a command which I'm not getting it. Maybe tomorrow I'll share you that. But is this part clear? So you have a front-end service. From the front end, you can ping the actual internal IP. That works. Then you can ping the alias IPs. That also works. Maybe this is your recommendation service. You call it. Then your product catalog service, which we have mentioned it as 200. So you can do it. So you don't need to do any much changes there. So that with the alias IP, the concept becomes little easier to work there. Now this demo was basically where you use the primary IP range itself and you did everything. You use only one range and used that. So, but this may not be a good practice because what usually people do is primary is for infrastructure to address my VM. I'm going to use it. Anything with respect to the individual service, I use the secondary IP range is a standard practice people follow. So to show you that, let me just delete this VM. The front end, I'm going to keep it like that. front end I'll keep it. What I will do now is go to my subnetwork Taiwan and add couple of ranges, secondary ranges. So IP range. Now let me get this example. So I will call this as something like range 1, and it does not need to be your secondary range, should be part of your primary range. It could be totally different. As long as it is RFC 1918 standard, that's enough. So I'm going to use this one. This is my first range. The second range which I wanted is two ranges which I'm creating, secondary ranges. So in subnetwork Taiwan, and the primary range is 10 dot address space. The secondary range is maybe you want to do it in 192, that is also fine. So you have class A, class B, class C all in one subnetwork itself. So class A is your primary, class B and class C is your secondary range. Save it. Save it. Let's wait for it to show up. It's still creating. Okay, it is created. It is created now. This is the range. Now I'll go refresh the screen. Like subnetworks, is it possible to increase the number of alias IP when the IP is not available in the IP range? Possible. So I'll show you that once we finish this demo. So should be possible. So like what Vivek is asking is, now you put /24 as your subnetwork mask, meaning if you want to expand your subnetwork, which is basically the secondary side range, is it possible? Yes, it should be possible. I'll show you that once I finish this part of the demonstration. So I'll create one more VEM, which is going to be a recommendation product catalog service. So recommendation product catalog secondary range. Using the secondary range, hope the typo secondary recommendation. Okay, so Taiwan, in Taiwan, go to my networking, use my Taiwan. This is all standard. This is all standard. Now, when I click on my alias IPs, previously it was only showing one range. Now I have two ranges, folks. This is the main difference. So as a best practice, people always use the primary range for the infrastructure to address your VMs. They use secondary range to address the services which is running inside the VM. Okay, so I'm going to use range 1 for my what product recommendation. So 172.16. What was that which was mentioned? Uh, so okay, I'll make it something like this. Something like this. 1.100. So sorry, this is my first alias IP. The second alias IP which I wanted to use is from my range 2, where my product catalog service will run under 200.100. Sorry, I did not use the right range. Is this part clear, folks? We have not created it, but from this range, I'm going to use one. So this is going to be my recommendation one, recommendation service. This is going to be used for my product catalog service. Is this part clear, folks? Is this part clear? There's an error. I'm going to remove that. But is this part clear? So you can use it basically from your secondary range. This should be the best practice, basically. Primary address should be for your VMs, which is the infra. Secondary range for your services. Now let me go and create it. I don't need an external IP address. Done. Done. If I click on this VM, I see my primary range is this, internal IP address is this, the alias are 172 and 168. So let me just open up my front end machine. So if I do ping, this should work. No wonder, works. Now I want to call my other two service. Yeah, you can do that so that you can count. Actually, you have to use -C if you want for 3 counts. So if you want for 3 counts, after 3 counts, it's going to cut off. In Windows, maybe -N. So Linux -C. So it is also working. Now the last one, my other service, product catalog 192.168.200. This also works. Now with just the concept of alias IP, I'm able to basically do what I wanted. So I was able to achieve it very easily, very easily. It worked. And we have not touched upon DNS, so don't worry, we'll touch upon it. So remembering the IP address may not be so user friendly. So, but we can have, instead of this, we can call it as product service. Instead of this one, we can call it as a recommendation service. But the concept of alias IP is going to be helpful when you want to call multiple or different microservices using different IP. So you will not have that issue of always sending the request to one IP address. You have to play around with the ports. Playing around with the ports is the old style. Now you can use alias IPs basically. So is this part of the demo clear, folks? Using a virtual machine. Using a virtual machine. Is this part clear, folks? Any questions? So how to expand the secondary range, I'll show you that. The last part which I wanted to show is pods and services. In our GKE, also use alias IP. So when we did our Kubernetes demo in our compute class, we did not even look into the networking part. Now we know a little bit about networking, right? We can create a Kubernetes cluster, maybe possibly two. We'll try to create a two Kubernetes cluster and see how these alias IPs are going to be created automatically. Or you can also explicitly mention my pod should take this range, my services should take this range. You can also do that. Okay. So before I show the Kubernetes, okay, I'll provision the Kubernetes cluster because it's going to take 4 minutes or 5 minutes. So I wanted two Kubernetes cluster, one like the one which you did, no settings, nothing, just default. The second one, we will explicitly mention it and do it. Then I'll come and answer Vivek's question of expanding your secondary range. So let's see the last bullet point and understand it. So for that, I want to take a screenshot of this one. So this is how it looks like. So let me take a screenshot just for your reference, how it looks like. So this is the current stuff. Now I'm going to go and create a basically a couple of Kubernetes cluster to avoid any quota issues. I'm going to create a one node Kubernetes cluster, two one node Kubernetes cluster. Let me delete these things. So what I will do is one Kubernetes cluster, I will use this one, basically batch 6 custom VPC, and I'll create it in Singapore. The moment I create it in Singapore, you will see automatically a secondary ranges added, automatically added. Another Kubernetes cluster will create in VPC Taiwan, and we will use these secondary ranges for our this thing because we have it. Here we don't have it, so Kubernetes can automatically create it if you say automatically allocate it. But here in us another VPC, we will use our existing secondary range. We can mention that. So let's do that. Just waiting for the VM to get deleted. And by the time it gets deleted, so folks, I just added a new video. If you are interested, look into this schedule part. Was really good to know that this feature was really working actually. So yesterday I posted it. Give a try, see if it could be helpful. So if you want to schedule to stop a VM during a weekend and start it back on weekdays, it could be a good choice. Try it. It's a nice one. I really liked it because previously I used to do it with cloud functions and cloud scheduler to stop a VM regularly and bring it back. Now it's just a service which comes automatically, so you can try using it. Okay. So why the VM is taking longer time to delete? Okay, anyway, I should be able to provision it. Let me create a Kubernetes cluster. First, I'll create the standard way which we did. Okay, so standard Kubernetes cluster. I'll call this as default, all default cluster in Singapore. Yeah, Singapore A. That's good enough. And I don't want more number of nodes, folks. I'm just going to make a one node Kubernetes cluster. One node Kubernetes cluster. And why this error keeps on popping is in our first time when we created Kubernetes cluster, we had default VPC. But now we learned a good amount of concepts, network concept. We totally removed our default VPC. Even in our training, we are not using default VPC. So it's totally not there. And by default, the Kubernetes cluster expects, or the UI expects to have a default VPC. It's not there. That's the reason it is popping that message. So click on the networking part. Now choose this one. It's going to show automatically your two subnetworks, which is in Singapore. So that's it, folks. So when I do this one, right, basically you see this, folks, automatically create secondary ranges for your pods and for your services. If you just leave it as this, it's going to automatically create it. It's going to automatically create it. Otherwise, you have to mention the range specifically. Okay. So I'm going to leave it as automatic. Let me click on create. So this is going to be our all default one. The moment it gets completely created, if we go back to the screen, you should see two secondary ranges added, one for your pod, one for your services. One for your service. So by the time this gets created, I'll create one more Kubernetes cluster in Taiwan where we use these two secondary ranges. Maybe 172 we will use it for pods, 192 we will use it for services. Okay, how to do that? Let me just show you that. I'll just create one more. And I'll take this opportunity to show a private Kubernetes cluster. Okay, so private cluster, I will make it as Taiwan A. Number of nodes, I want only one, nothing more. Go to my networking. Here, all these times we are using public IA cluster, meaning the virtual machine which you are going to have is going to have an external IP address, and your master or the control plane can be accessed from outside easily if you just have the credentials. Now what I'm going to do basically now is create a private Kubernetes cluster, which is really hot in the real implementation. So in all the implementations which I have done so far in production, I make sure I always create a private Kubernetes cluster. And this cluster is not even accessible from the outside world, folks. Only you have to be in the VPC. You have to have a VM or a bastion host to do connect anything. So if you just give this access control plane using internal IP, external IP, then from the outside world you can access it. But I make it still secure. I remove that also. I don't need any external IP itself to connect to my this thing. So I do everything via my network itself, via my VPC. I do connect to my Kubernetes cluster, do everything. So that's what I do basically. So I can give now control plane does not, if I give this one, right, the control plane is going to have an external. If I give like this, the control plane is going to have an external IP address. But if I uncheck this, the control plane, basically your master will not even have an external IP address. Let me make an internal IP address, something like, I'm just going to use the same example there. 172.16.0.0/28. Was that the one which was mentioned? Yep. So my private cluster will not have a external IP address itself totally. Then coming to my pods, how can I remove this? Private cluster is required. I should be able to assign it. Okay, the VPC I have to use this. Now you see this, folks. Just observe the screen once. So I have two subnetworks or two VPCs. VPC Taiwan, VPC Taiwan 2. If I choose VPC Taiwan 2, the pod range and this thing, it is totally disabled. I cannot do it. The reason why is my Taiwan 2 does not have any secondary ranges. But if I use VPC Taiwan, if I use VPC Taiwan, you see this option, because VPC Taiwan has two secondary ranges, this option becomes editable. I can either make it automatically assigned, or I can remove this and use my ranges. Use my ranges. Is this part clear, folks? I just wanted to wait here for your confirmation. Is this part clear? Is this part clear? So how your secondary ranges comes handy, that too when you are using Kubernetes cluster. Okay, and I also took an advantage to show you the private IP address, a private Kubernetes cluster. To be very frank, till now I have never shown to any batch the private Kubernetes cluster. Why I'm showing you this one is because the exam pattern could have changed. I don't know the details, but it could have changed. More emphasis on Kubernetes is important. So that's the reason I thought, let me use this opportunity to show you a private Kubernetes cluster stuff. Okay, so now what I'm saying, because I have two ranges. Range 1 I have assigned to pods, meaning any pod which I create in my Kubernetes cluster, it's going to be 100% sure it's going to have 172.16.100.x as the IP address, and the services which I'm going to create, cluster IP, basically is going to have 192.168.200 as the range. That's it, folks. Now, and this Kubernetes cluster, I cannot even access it from outside, including your cloud shell. How to access it? I'll show you that. So click on create. One is a public Kubernetes cluster. The other one is a private Kubernetes cluster. So it's going to take time for it to come up. So by the time this comes up, Vivek had a question. Can we expand the secondary range? Let me just show you. Edit. Oh, it's not possible. Okay, I was not aware of that. Maybe let me. Okay, I'm not sure. I was under the impression it can be done. 1 minute. That was a good one. Let me see whether I can do now. Okay, I'll see that. Vivek. I'll see whether it is going to work. Now, I'll check. I'll come back to you. So it looks like it's not possible. I'll check it. Is there anything which I can do there? The default VPC is created. The default VPC is created in Singapore. And my endpoint, meaning my master, my control plane, it has an external IP address. And if I go to my VM screen, this is my all default cluster node. It also has an external IP address. It is in this one. Now, you see this change, folks? You see this change? Why is that? If I click on the subnetwork, because we created a virtual machine, we created a Kubernetes cluster in Singapore, and using basically subnetwork Singapore, you see two CIDR ranges added. Two IP ranges added. One for your pods, one for your services. This was automatically added, and this is going to be totally decided by Kubernetes during the creation. So this is something which you see is automatically added. So if you just want to verify it, refer back to our screenshot. So you see in our screenshot, this part was nothing. It was only one IP or range. Now it has a drop down. Which has two secondary IP ranges, one for pod, one for your services. So that's the huge difference. And if you want to connect to this Kubernetes cluster, you just click on this, click on connect, get the command line which is going to get the credentials, and you should be able to do it. Let me just show you that. The private cluster is getting still created. So now if I just connect to my public Kubernetes cluster, I should be able to connect it. The master is accessible publicly. As long as I have the credentials, I should be able to connect it. Now if I just do kubectl get nodes, nodes, everything is going to be the same. So I have my all default cluster node pool. I'm able to connect it. Now if you want to deploy a service if you want to create a deployment and expose it as a service, you can do it. And once you do it, basically what it indicates is your services, your pods are going to have this IP range. Your service is going to have this IP range. Let's just do that. Let's just do that. And I'm going to use the default Nginx demonstration, folks. We have already seen other demos. So for this part, I'm going to use the default Nginx, which is a web server. So deploy, I'm going to use Nginx. Click done, continue. I'll call this application as, yeah, Nginx itself should be good enough. Nginx is good enough. And I have two clusters. I'm going to use my default, all default cluster, deploy it. After it deploys, I'm going to expose it as a cluster IP, not as a load balancer, not as a node pool. Node port. So we are going to use internal IP itself and see how it's going to work basically. Done. Nginx is deployed in our all default cluster. Expose it as a service. So I'm going to expose it. So if you see the target port, this is the port on which the container listens on. So Nginx listens on port 80, and I'm going to put it as port 80 here. And the type of service, I want it as cluster IP, internal IP only, which I'm going to refer to. So I'm going to call this as my recommendation service. Recommendation. Expose it. Done. Done. Similarly, let me create one more workload. Let me create one more workload. Maybe call it as product catalog. So again Nginx, we are not going to use different container images, same Nginx, but giving different service names. Done, continue, call this as product catalog. Product catalog workload. On the same cluster, deploy it. Two workloads and two services. And we'll again expose this and we'll call this as product catalog service. And we'll have one more service called as front end, again using Nginx, and we'll see how we can call it. The same demo which you saw in virtual machine, you are seeing it in via Kubernetes. That's it. So again, port 80, and I'll call this as product catalog. Product catalog. Expose it. Done. One last time, I'm just going to create a front end service. Again, using the same container image. So I'm going to call this as front end. Front end. Deploy it. So three services as per this architecture we have done, and I'll show you how I can communicate using internal IPs and show. And more than that, in Kubernetes, you have something called as kube DNS. I can use the service name. So Mangesh should be really happy. So we are not going to use IP address. We are going to use the service name to communicate. So it's going to be much easier for you. Front end is also deployed. I'll expose it to, and I'll call this as front end. That's it. So three deployments, 3 services, all exist, right? If I just go back, 3 pods or 3 deployments to be very specific, 3 deployments and 3 services. Now, quickly, if you see, right, these are the services. Look at this endpoint, folks. Endpoints. Now, look at your subnetwork. So services, it is very clearly mentioning all the services which is going to be provisioned. It's going to be 10.224.0.0/20, which is in sync with what you see. So you get the information clear here, folks. All the services which you create is going to always have this range only. This range only. Now, how can I see the pod IP? I'll show you that in a minute. How do we see the pod IP specifically? Pod IPs are not going to be that helpful, but if you want to verify it, I can show you that. So all your services are going to be with this range only. Very clear. Is that part clear, folks? What we did so far. Is this clear? Thank you. Now, what I will do is basically see the number of pods. So 3 pods are running because that's a default setting. Now what I will do is I will go interactively log in into a pod. So I'll go to my front end pod, folks. I'll go to my front end pod and I will show the front end pod's IP address, IP space A. Now, if I put IP space A, the expectation is the IP is of that pod is going to be 10.120.300% sure it should be that one. So let's see whether it's going to work. IP does not work. I have to install that component. Looks like okay. Let me just see what is this operating system all about. CETC/OS release. It's Debian 10. IP is not that is not installed. Light version. So IP if config. Let me see if it works. Otherwise, I have to install a component basic. No. So I have to do apt update. Can I do that? Okay, it is updating. I'm literally doing it in the pod. So anybody knows what is the command to install IPA in Debian? Install install net tools or something. Net tools, net utilities or something. I don't remember it. Net tools. Just to get the IP address, folks. That's it. Good. Now let me see whether the IP address works. What is the command? ipconfig missing. Okay, what is the command you have to do is net tools should show. Let me just see. Okay, IP address. Okay, let me see that. No, or let me do ifconfig. I just don't know what is the command. Okay, it is working. Now ifconfig is working. So ifconfig is working and the IP address is very clear. 10.120.0. That is what we also see it here. The pod IP. The pod IP is not going to be heavily used. Service IP is what we are going to use because we are going to communicate using service only. So, but if you want to know the pod IP, you can see it. It is properly shown. And your service IPs, if you want to see it, We saw it here. Or if you want to see it via command, you can also see that with the help of kubectl get svc. This is your pod range. So now you get to see how basically your alias IP comes in use for a product which we have already known. So we did not much explore it when we are doing it in our beginning stage, because we are not knowing what is alias IP. Now we know and we see it is already used. And this is what you see in many such products in GCP. Some concepts which they show, they will be using it internally also. That's really good, right? That's really good. So now what I will do is I'll show, I have a pod. Now what I will show is from the front end pod, I'll show how I can communicate with my other service using internal IP, or I can just do curl. I can use the service IP and do it. But first I'll show you the service IP and show you. I'll use one of this. I want to call product catalog. So I'm going to use this IP, do curl. Hope curl works. Yes. It gives me the output of your Nginx output. So welcome to Nginx. So I'm able to connect to my product catalog from my front end. Similarly, if I show my recommendation, even that should work. It works. Now, some of us may not be so comfortable remembering the IP address. We cannot even remember it. So this is where your cube DNS, an internal feature, the resolution happens internally. So you don't need to remember the IP anymore. Just type product. I guess Mangesh may really like this. He was asking about DNS last time. So if I just do product catalog, it comes. It comes. So if I do recommendation, if I see, is the spelling correct? Recommendation, yes. Curl recommendation. I get a result. So this is how basically your alias IP, the secondary range which you do, and your service and pods all come in sync for your this thing, folks. So is this part clear? Which I wanted to show you was basically on this part. So this command is a good one, net tools. Is this part clear? Good. Thank you, folks. Now the most interesting part is basically, hope my private cluster is created. Now I wanted to show you this difference. So refresh the screen. Now we do the same demo, but using our private cluster. Now, how do you verify it is a private cluster or not? Simple. If the nodes are going to have internal IP address, it is a private cluster. Simple. So you see this? This is your node of your private cluster. You only see internal IP address. You don't see an external IP address. It's very clearly mentioned. That's it. So now another thing when it comes to private cluster, because it's private, this VMs will not have access to external IP, all those things. They'll not have access to those things. Internet, all those things will be blocked. If it's totally private, you have to first connect to your cluster, right? Even that will be blocked. We made it very secure. We don't want any even external endpoint. What do you mean by an external endpoint? Let me just show you that. So in one tab, I have all default, which shows the endpoint, the master node or the control plane IP address, which is really clear. It is external IP address. Now, if I go to my another Kubernetes cluster, which is my private Kubernetes cluster, you see this range, folks? What is this IP? Can anybody tell me? What class? First of all, is it internal IP or external IP? Is it an internal IP or an external IP, folks? By just looking at the IP, you can tell it. Internal. Class B. It's internal IP, it's class B. So now, if it's internal IP, you cannot even connect it. I can just show you that. Just click on this connect button, copy this, go to your Cloud Shell. Now, try doing this. It's going to throw you an error. Okay, it got the details. Now it shows I'm connected to a private cluster. If I do kubectl get nodes or no, whatever it is, it will say I cannot communicate. It is going to say I cannot even communicate. Sorry, because your Cloud Shell is in a different network altogether. It's not in the same VPC as what you had. So you cannot communicate with a private Kubernetes cluster in any way. Now, then without that, how will you do it? Is a question. Any thoughts, folks? Now I cannot get it. Now, if I just use one more utility, there's a utility called as kubectl. So kubectx context. It's going to show you the various configurations which is there in your .kube folder. I have shown this already. So if you just go to .kube folder in your Cloud Shell, you'll have a config file. What and all the clusters which you connected, all the details are going to be there. If you are working in multiple Kubernetes cluster environments, you can use this context to switch between two clusters. So I'm currently in private. It did not work. I will switch back to my all default cluster, switch to the context. Now, if I do kube context, it shows I'm in my default all default cluster. Now, if I do kubectl get nodes, it shows super fast. This is the command which I use basically to see whether I can communicate with the node or not. Now I can do it because it's a public Kubernetes cluster. But if I switch my context to my private cluster and verified whether it's switched, the yellow color indicates the context is switched. So whatever I do now, it has to be with my private cluster. Now if I run the command which ran in front of you, it's not going to work. It's going to say I cannot even connect. So because your control plane or the master Kubernetes cluster is internal IP, now it's not going to connect. It's going to take time. I can just leave it like that. What's the solution for this, folks? You should have the solution by this time. So I want to connect to this master, the endpoint. I want to communicate with my Kubernetes, all those things. What will you do?
Build a Linux box inside that subnet or in the same private network.
Beautiful.
One solution.
That's beautiful. That's the only solution I would say. That's the only solution. Easy, straightforward, no extra works. Have one more virtual machine. You can treat it as your bastion host or jump host, whatever it is. So treat it, connect it, and then do it. So as Anil Kumar mentioned, let me just go and create a virtual machine. This VM was created in VPC Taiwan, if I'm not wrong. I will do this something like this. So create an instance. Bastion GKE master, or master would be misleading. I'll create it in Taiwan. Now what I will do is basically go, and I'll make it so secure. Even this bastion host will not have an external IP address, folks. Even this will not have an external IP address. I'll show you how it works. IAP basically. So VPC network, VPC Taiwan. This is the primary IP address, and I don't need an external IP address. No need. Done. Click on create. And this is how people do it in production. Now this is my bastion host. Now I want to connect to the master, to this master or the control plane using that bastion host. How? Let me just show you. SSH SSH, wait for that to come up. By the time that comes up, I'll make sure okay. There's one more VM. What is this VM? Dismiss. Okay, I'm in my bastion host, folks. Now, first of all, I need to connect it, right? So if you see here, this VM, can I put a filter? Only VMs in VPC Taiwan. I don't want other VMs. Okay. So just to show you that this is your node, basically a part of your node pool, and you have a bastion host which you want to connect. And this also does not have external IP address, meaning it cannot communicate with the external world. But both are in the same VPC. I can communicate between them internally. So that is okay for me. So that is enough. So I'm going to just click on connect. Do this. Now, first of all, I'll show it does not have internet access. Does not have it. Get the credentials. Okay, I get an error. Now I would want your help to fix this, folks. This is something which you have done n number of times. I want your help. Basically, accessing Kubernetes cluster requires Kubernetes cluster command line kubectl. Okay, it is saying this is not there. So let's install it. I'll install it first. And you may ask, for installing, do we need an external IP address? Because it's going to be internal command. It's a command which is, they have some repo somewhere inside. So we can get this stuff easily accessed. Let's see whether we can install it or not, first of all. So we ran this command. It throwed an error. To do all those things, you need to have the kubectl installed. But it is not there. So we'll try to see whether we can install it. And I can show you a bug also here. Let me see whether I can show you that bug. So gcloud command is going to be there by default. Gcloud is installed. Now if I see the components which is installed, components list, it's going to show, okay, kubectl is not installed. Good. So previously they were not showing this. Now it shows clearly kubectl is not installed. Very clear. So install it. The command to install it is going to be this one, gcloud components install kubectl. Now you don't need an internet access is my understanding. Let's give a try. Okay, it says one more error. You cannot perform this action because cloud SDK components is disabled for this installation. Run this command. So it's like a chain reaction. You want to do connect to the Kubernetes cluster. It throws kubectl is not installed. It gives you a command. You try it. That throws something is disabled. The cloud SDK component manager is disabled in this installation, meaning in this virtual machine. So it is saying you have to do sudo apt install. Now, if I use this, it works. And you don't need an internet access. Basically, it comes from an internal source. Now, good. We have kubectl installed. To verify it, you can do components list. It should, I'm not sure whether it shows. It does not show. That's okay. It's not showing it as installed. That's okay. But it's installed. I can verify it by just a command like which kubectl. It is there. It is installed. Now connect to your Kubernetes cluster and see what is going to happen. Now Kubernetes kubectl is installed, folks. Now I want your inputs to fix this error, and I'm not going to say it. Please don't mention it. Please put it in a private chat so that everybody is going to think. I want your thoughts. What's happening? I wanted to connect to a Kubernetes cluster. It's in the same network. I have my kubectl running, but what is this error which is showing? Help me out and please put it in the chat, private chat. You can take 5 minutes. Anil Kumar, maybe think some more. I just cube file is not there is what you're saying. Absolutely correct. .cube folder is not creating, but to create it, something should be there. You are absolutely correct, but to create it, something should be there. That is the question. Need to log into the project. Which project, folks? What project? No, I want a complete answer. Please treat me as 0. You give me the answer, I'm going to do it. I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. It's in the same VPC. Look at the error. You should get it. The answer is on the screen itself. Let me just make it little big. Beautiful, Vivek. That was beautiful. That's what I was expecting. Good. Beautiful, Mangesh. That's good. That's good. Yes, Deepak. That's good. Deepak Bandari. That's good. Basically, I'm just going to give maybe a couple of minutes for others to also think. It always boils down to two things. Always. Two services, folks. From a virtual machine, you are trying to connect to a Kubernetes cluster. Two services. If they were to do the communication, how will you do it? Basically. Answer as yes. So basically, Anil Kumar, Mangesh, Vivek, Deepak got it correctly. Basically, it's service account, folks. That's it. Service account. Now, let me see what is a service account. I don't need to create a service account. Let me see what is a service account which I have already. Now, it looks like we are same concept, service account not working. We fixed it. Now we are in day 23. We are still learning this. You see, it's very vast. So the service account which you're using is your default service account. So if it's a default service account, it's going to have editor role. And basically, if you have not done anything specifically, it's going to be default service account. Access scope is going to be all default, meaning your compute engine is disabled. This is the service which you should have, or the scope should be enabled. Either give full access, or because this is at the end nothing but virtual machines only, right? So compute engine API, if you enable it, the access scope, if you enable it, it's going to work out. So that this error is going to be removed. Insufficient permission access. So either create a new service account, stop the VM, attach that service account, give it the credentials it should do, or close this, stop the VM, make sure your compute engine access scope is enabled. So let's see whether it's going to work. But because it is an issue with the this thing, service account, I have to stop it. Even if you want to create a new service account and attach it, you have to stop it. So now we missed our fundamentals. So we missed our fundamentals. It was purposely missed so that you recollect what we learned basically. But when you do something like this in your real implementation, make sure you create a specific service account which connects it. Don't use your default service account. So VM is getting stopped. Is it stopped? Yep. Edit it. The simplistic way is give full access. We will not do that. That's going to be the most dangerous option. Editor role, full access. Instead of that, we'll enable only one specific service. Compute Engine API, the Compute Engine access scope, read and write from the Compute Engine related stuffs. Remaining everything should be okay. So from networking, we jumped back to our IAM folks. So it's going to always follow you. It's like your Hutch dog, the ad which you see in Hutch or the Vodafone ad. The Hutch dog keeps on following you, the person wherever it goes. The IAM keeps on following you wherever you go. So never forget IAM. Done. Start. Hope it works. Let's see it. SSH. I'll go back to my Kubernetes. If everything works, now it should create your .cube folder, which Anil Kumar was mentioning. Retry. Good. So before I do this, same service account, same. Let me see whether it works now. Does not work. Again, should I have given more access? Should I have given more access? Anything else apart from this? Service account, access scope, change, compute engine, read write. Yes, everything is there. What else I have to do? Let me do sudo and try it. Nothing. Should I give full access? What else? What else I can do? It's taking time to propagate. No. Get credentials has insufficient authentication scope. What else is the authentication scope which I have to give? Any thoughts, folks? My understanding was only this one. Anything else? BigQuery? No. We have not even come to those things. Anything else which shows? Maybe user info. User info, task queue, storage. User info is what I feel could be one. Let me give a try, stopping this VM. I don't want to give full, or I can create a service account with a specific role. Roles like to get the credentials, what should be the command? Kubernetes cluster get credentials. Some Kubernetes role should be good enough. Container cluster get credentials. Let me see whether there's any role which can help us. Just finding out the role. So I usually use Kubernetes. Should have worked is my understanding. User info One last time. What else? Service control enabled. Storage, nothing. Task queue, nothing. Just see a role, whether there's any role. Authorized network. Is there an authorized network? Authorized network. No. Already we are already in Kubernetes, right? We are already in the Kubernetes. In our same network, it's already authorized. We are already in our internal network. So, and the question was basically, it was basically highlighting something on the insufficient access scope. It was not talking anything about the network. So I feel this one should help. Basically, if it does not work, I'm going to give full access and show you it's going to work. Full access works, but I did not want to give full access. Did I stop this VM? Stop it. Let me see whether there's any role like this. Containers dot clusters. I just need to get the cluster details. That's it, nah. That's it. So these are the roles. Editor is there. Editor. I usually give Kubernetes engine developer. Usually I use that, but currently it is having editor role, and maybe one specific access scope is blocking it. What is that? Looking at the access scope, looks like it's user profile. Nothing else makes any sense. One last try. Enable this user info. If it does not work, I'm going to give full access and at least do the demo, complete it. Let me just close this unwanted screens. Okay, access scope, user info enabled, compute engine read write. Let me see whether I can see the stuffs will work or not. Because we are already editor, right? We are already editor, Anil. So to do this, you just need to get the credentials, right? Get the details of your this thing. So editor role should be good enough. The default service account is already having editor role, so that should be good enough. So I'm just trying to see what is the actual role, access scope required for your default service account access scope, so I can do it. Let me just give a try. If it does not work, I'm just going to stop the VM and give full access and do it. So maybe tomorrow I can tell you what is the option which works. So connect, get the details. Let me see whether it's going to make that. Sorry. So before that, ls minus a, there's no .cube folder, which Anil Kumar was mentioning. Still not working. I don't know the details, folks. Maybe enable servers, exchange. Would this work? Change servers. Okay. I don't want to waste much time, your time also. So I'm just going to stop this, give full access and show you. It's going to work. I used to never do it with default service account. I used to use a custom service account always. I thought, let me give a try with this. So it did not work. No problem. I'm going to give full access with the default service account itself, which is dangerous because editor role full access, very dangerous. But for our demonstration quickly, I can do it. Or if you want to create a service account also, I can do it. What about enable API? Which enable API, Anil? Which API? API. What is that API which you're talking about?
Just scroll up a little bit, please. No. Where the service account is there.
A service account it is.
No. In this screen, wherever
Oh, okay,
you
okay,
are
okay,
there.
okay. Okay, got it. Yes.
Yeah, that's based.
No, that's all the service APIs. That's all the APIs which they are saying.
Okay.
That's all. That's all basically. All the APIs individually called. So let me just show you. There's no one button to do. So either you, this is what you're saying,
So
enable all.
yeah. No. The
This is
next
what.
one, set each API.
That is what we were doing actually. So we were trying to set. Usually, we tried two. One compute which was disabled, we made it as read write. That's the maximum.
Okay.
User info
Got
was the one which I felt did not work. All other service does not make any sense. Did not work. Hopefully this will work. Fingers crossed. If it does not work, I have an option which is going to work. We'll create a service account, give it compute Kubernetes engine developer, and it should work. That I have done it in production. It has worked. So let's see the last option, folks. Third option usually works, at least in GCP. I have seen it. Full access I have given. Start the VM. Yep, let's connect it. Third time, having a great assumption that it's going to work. Third time always. Let's see it whether it works. Magic of three sometimes works. Let's see it. If it works, maybe you can take it as a small assignment and find out what is that specific role which is making it work. Or maybe it is not even shown. That specific access scope itself is not shown. That could be also possible. Because access scope itself is legacy. When it was introduced, maybe at that time Kubernetes itself was not there. So that's the reason they don't have that option itself. That is also possible. So ls-a .cube folder is not there. gcloud auth list. It is the same compute engine default service account. Let's see whether this works. Awesome, it worked. I guess basically they don't have the right access scope here. So whenever you do Kubernetes, if you are using default service account, you have to give full access because basically they don't have the specific access scope for Kubernetes is my understanding, folks. Okay, so now I'm able to connect to my private cluster. Now the magic command ls-a, as Anil Kumar mentioned, you have the .cube folder there. You should see the config file also. You should see the config file, which basically you are connected to the internal IP address. This is your node master or the control plane's IP address. You are connected, folks. You're connected. Let's verify it whether it's really going to work. kubectl get node does not work. It works. So is this part clear, folks? Only using your virtual machine in the same VPC you can do it. If this bastion host is in some other VPC, but in the same project or something, do a VPC peering and then connect it. That's another option, basically. So now I'm able to connect to my node. I can see whether there's any pod. Nothing is there. Any services? Nothing is. Okay, one default service is going to be running. That's the cluster IP. And this is nothing but your, if you go back to your Taiwan, subnetwork Taiwan. You look at it. So you gave range 2 for your services. Very clearly mentioned. Now let me just deploy one pod in my private cluster and show the IP address and we'll stop the demo. Okay, so go to workloads, deploy. Nginx only. Continue. Call this as front end private. And the cluster is my private Kubernetes cluster. Deploy it. And we'll expose it. And I'll have one recommendation service, private recommendation service, and show how we can do it. It's going to work, but I'll just show you because we have come so far. Why don't we do this part of the demo also? Am I be able to reach it first of all? The question. It should work if it's private. Ever deployed it this way on a cluster, but let's see it if it works or not. Okay, waiting for the pods deployment. Image backup. Image latest registry. Okay. Okay. Anything which comes to your mind, folks, here? What does this show basically? Pull the image. It's not working. Any thoughts here, folks? I'm not able to deploy my Nginx, which worked. I'm not able to do this. No access to registry. I guess, is it to registry? Is it to registry, folks? Now you see the moment you make it private, you get lots of issues. Yes, Anil. This is due to your Docker hub or Docker registry if you want. So it's going to internet, folks, to get Nginx latest. So if I just go here, Docker hub. So if I search for Nginx, it's basically going to Docker hub and getting the image. But yeah, see Nginx. But yours is what? It's a private Kubernetes cluster, so it cannot even reach to internet, because of which you are not able to do it. Now, what's the solution? What's the solution for it, folks? I cannot reach to internet. Better use your container registry. Simple. Use your container registry and you should be able to get the details there. So what I will do basically now is I will just pull this Nginx, push it to our container registry, and we'll try to deploy it. Maybe it's going to be a little long. So what we'll do is we'll just take a 10 minutes break first, come back. If there's any questions, we'll answer it first. Then I'll go and pull this and show you how we can do it. So if you use all GCP products, you should not have any issue with internal stuffs. So with your internal IP itself, you should be able to do it. But you're trying to go to internet, that's where the problem comes. Okay. So we'll just stop it here because I don't want to still extend it, because pull, I have to do it, push it to GCR, then I have to pull it, then it's going to work. And if it's going to be GCR, it's going to work because it's going to be all internal, right? So now only when you're going to external world, you will have this issue. So let me just stop here.
This conference will now be recorded.
So before the break, what we tried was we created a private Kubernetes cluster. First of all, the challenge was somehow we created it with good N2. The secondary range, using the secondary IP, we were able to create the pod IPs and the cluster and the service IPs. It worked very beautifully. So we did not have much issue. So if I just go back, so with lots of enthusiasm, with secondary IPs, understanding the concept of secondary IP and alias concepts. We tried, it worked beautifully, but that's where the next thing was all problematic stuff. We were not able to even connect it. So as Anil Kumar mentioned, we went into a virtual machine, we created a virtual machine, tried to connect it. That was a good move actually. So because both were in the same VPC, we were able to connect it. So if I put this one, we were able to connect from this bastionos. At least we were able to get some message properly. Then we had again some challenges with our service account. We took some time, we fixed it. Now after doing all those things, we are able to connect all those things. If you want to deploy something, and that too if the image is outside of GCP like an Nginx, if it's an inside image you should not have issues basically, but if it's an outside image you definitely have a issue. We got it very clear from this because a cluster itself is not exposed to the outside world. So this is the current stage. So one possible option is bring the image to GCP. Try to use container registry is what we are seeing as a possible choice. Let's see that. Okay. So I'm going to pull the same image and upload it back or push it to our GCR. How do I do it? Because we have not done it. Let's use this opportunity to do that part. So basically what I will do is Docker images. Nothing is there. I'm going to do basically copy this line, pull this into my local Cloud Shell environment. Let's wait for it to come up. So if I now do Docker images, I should see one entry. 9 days back, the latest one has been pushed. Now, if you see the tag is latest, the repository is Docker Hub. So I have to re-tag it basically as something like gcr.io / your project ID. Then I can push it to my GCR. So let me just show you whether what is there in my GCR. Most of the time we built our own image and we pushed it. This time we get an outside image, we push it to our GCR. So let me see, is there anything there? Nothing is there. The reason is I would have deleted the bucket because all the GCR images get stored in a Google Cloud Storage bucket. So I have deleted it. Now when I push it, you may see few more images coming up, folks. I'm not sure whether it's a bug or a feature. So if I don't have the bucket, if I delete the bucket, everything goes. If I push a new image, also the existing images which was there in the storage bucket comes up. I don't know what is this feature, but just wanted to give you that heads up there. Now I'm going to retag it. So we know how tag works. So we had used this, if I'm not wrong, -t. If my syntax is correct. So it's going to be, I don't know. So let me just use help. Okay, source and tag. Okay, docker tag source is nginx latest, and my target image has to be something like gcr.io / dev shell project id _ nginx latest. It's not good to use latest, but as per what is there, I'm just using it. Or if you want, you can put it as version 1.0. That is also a good choice. So let me just do this. I'm just doing a retagging. So do Docker images. Now I have a new tag. So I'm going to just push this to my GCR. So Docker push. Let's push it. Good. Now if I go to my GCR, if I refresh it, you may see a few other images also, folks. I'm not sure, as I mentioned, it's a bug or a feature. I'm not sure of that. Now, Cloud Run My App is something which we did last in the past. So they came up automatically because everything is stored in the same storage bucket. If I retrieve it, it comes back is my understanding. So ignoring these two things, the one which is of interest for us today is this one. Why 10 days back? Any reason, folks? Why it is 10 days back? We just created the image right now. Why it is showing 10 days back? Any thoughts? Any reason, folks? The answer is this one. What we have taken is we have taken it from the Docker Hub. In Docker Hub, Nginx people had created an image 9 days back. Yes, yes, Aman. So 9 days back, so 9 or 10, somewhere the timestamp, or maybe somewhere slightly missing there, but or maybe ahead there. So that 10 days, that's because it's in the Docker Hub. Yes, Aman, that was absolutely correct. So small things like this, if you start digging, right, you will get your understanding better, folks. Now everything is good, so I'm going to use this image. Okay, so now anything else you have to do it, folks. Any thoughts? So container registry, which is nothing but a storage bucket. I need to read this storage bucket content from into a virtual machine, basically Kubernetes at the end, virtual machine and a bucket. They have to communicate using internal IP address. Anything else should I do, or we are all good? Anything else, or we should be all good? Basically, we can give a try. If we get an error, we'll fix it. Or before that, because we learned something in our Kubernetes, in our networking class. So GCR is nothing but buckets. Kubernetes is nothing but your virtual machine. So these two communicating using internal IP address. Is it possible? Last week only we did it. So service accounts, all something which was in the beginning, so you would have forgotten it. So we did a refresh, but last week we discussed something. Two services using internal IP address if they were to communicate. What is that which is going to help us, folks? Going back. Private Google access. Private Google access. Private Google access can help us here. Private Google access. Two different services. So this may help us. So to be on the precautionary measure, what I will do is I'll go check where's my VM basically. I'll make sure I turn on that in that subnetwork level. I'll turn it on. So my VM, my Kubernetes is all provisioned in subnet. If I just see it, it's all going to be provisioned in Taiwan, and specifically the subnetwork is it's going to be, to show it somewhere. Network. Very strange, it does not show it, or I'm on the wrongful location. Instance group, let me click on that. That at least can give me the network details. Okay, I have to go to the VM level only. So VM. So everything is in subnetworks Taiwan. So if I go to my subnetwork Taiwan, fortunately we have turned on private Google access. By default, it's going to be off. Last week we did a demo similarly, so that's the reason it is on. So this can also play a major role basically. Now let's go close this. We don't want this. We'll try to deploy a new one basically. Did it deploy? Did it deploy private? Has it worked? What is this? It showed error and worked. Sorry, 1 minute, folks. Did it work or not work? It was throwing us an error, right? It got deployed. Strange. Mm, Let me just refresh it once. It is deployed. It was able to pull it. Okay. It was able to pull it, but we saw that it was showing an error. Cannot pull. Strange. Let me try one more time. Deploy. Let me try this one. Nginx latest. Let me call this as product catalog private. I deploy this on private Kubernetes cluster. Deployed. This was the one which gave us an error last time. Let's give a try. Okay, it worked, folks. I don't know what was that error. Maybe I have to also see the recording. What was the thing which we did wrong? So it got deployed. Maybe the step which we did was not required itself. It's able to pull it somehow. I'm not sure how. It's able to pull it. It's able to pull it basically. And the image is actually from Docker Hub. It's coming from Docker Hub only. So it is there. It is there. Now let me show the last part of the demonstration where you wanted to see the IPs of the pod and all. We'll just see that part. So the Docker part which we did may not be relevant is what I feel. So it gave that error. That's the reason I thought it's not able to pull it, because I never pulled from Docker Hub. Always I used to pull it from GCR, but looks like it is working. I don't know how. I will also look into the recording one more time. What was that which we did slightly different, which worked last time it did not work. What is that? I'll also see it. So kubectl get pod, pods, po, anything is okay. So now let me just connect it interactively to my front end. Sorry folks, there was a network issue, sorry. So I'll just connect interactively from my front end, and I'll also make sure I get the IP, so I can just do apt update. Oh, I cannot even connect to internet, forget it. So I cannot connect to internet. So but I'll just do curl, or can I just do IP config? Okay, does not work. I'll just do curl recommendation. Sorry, product catalog. Sorry, product catalog hyphen private. Am I doing something wrong? Oh, I have not created a service, so I have just created a pod. The service is not there. So if I just go to my private, it is not exposed as a service. Let me expose it as a service. So 80 make it cluster IP and call this as private, expose it. Now it is exposed. Now when I do this, it's going to show welcome to, what is that, Nginx. It's going to work. It's going to work. So I can see how basically my alias IPs and the secondary IP range works in Kubernetes, that too in a private Kubernetes cluster. So I'm not able to show you the IP address of the pod only because I cannot connect to internet. Only because I cannot connect to internet, I'm not able to do it. But we can see the pod IP, the service IPs, kubectl get svc. It's going to be 172. The pod IPs is 192. The pod IPs are going to be, as per your this thing, it's going to be 172 basically. So it was only one simple concept, but was used heavily in Kubernetes. I just wanted to show you that, and maybe in the new pattern, I guess the new exam is going to be getting started. I don't know when. They mentioned it as spring 2021. So by the time definitely we finish, definitely the new pattern is going to be there. So I thought, let me also share you this private Kubernetes concept, private Kubernetes cluster concept, folks. So let me just stop here for any questions. Any questions so far on what we did, folks? We have done lots of stuffs. Little, if there's any confusion, please let me know. The Docker part, ignore it. So I guess that was not relevant. It throwed error, but later it was fixed somehow. I don't know why. It made our mind private. Good. So that's the whole intent, folks. You have to go into more into the private stuffs so that your security becomes more to a high level. The standards becomes going to become very high level basically. Okay, any others need to understand in deep? So yeah, I would strongly suggest do the demo, folks. Do the demo. Not very sure how much is going to come into the exam, but having this exposure is going to help you even in your real implementation. Because in real implementation, if you create a public Kubernetes cluster, it's a straightforward indication that you don't know GCP. That's the message which you're conveying to the customer. So when you're doing something in production, it has to be a private Kubernetes cluster. There's no need why you need to have a public Kubernetes cluster there. So it has to be private. So the message which you convey is going to be very important. So do that. Even in one of the implementations, not one, I guess two, the customer never asked they want a private Kubernetes cluster. Proactively, I did this. Basically. Just read a blog on this thing. I had lots of questions on Kubernetes and private. Okay, good. I'm not sure whether it is up. So if it's a latest blog, good. Because I'm not sure whether the exam is really turned in there or not. So having this exposure is going to be definitely helpful. So, so when it was in beta, okay, got it. I'm just going to delete these things. Because I may run short of quota. Okay, so that's on your alias IP concept, how it's been used. Now, we'll slowly come out of our comfort zone, folks. So I've not tried the autopilot feature, Vivek. So I've not tried it. It's not going to come in the exam. 100% sure because it was recently launched. So it's not going to come, don't worry. But I have not tried it yet. I have to try it yet. So coming back to the next part, all this time, almost like 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks, we are in networking only. All this time, if we were doing what we were doing, where we were in our comfort zone. What was our comfort zone now? GCP. So we were in our GCP, always talking about GCP network, but that's not going to be the reality, right? You have to interact with some other services. So you have to interact with some other services which is outside of GCP. It could be other cloud, it could be on-premise, or combination both, other cloud and on-prem, multi-cloud, hybrid multi-cloud environment. It could happen like this. So that's where few services which Google offers, like cloud VPN, interconnect, peering comes into picture. So this is totally, one side is going to be GCP, the other side of the network is going to be a non-GCP network. Please remember, it's a non-GCP network. It could be AWS, Azure, Alibaba Cloud, IBM Cloud, or your on-premise data center. So how these two networks can communicate each other. Again, the focus is internal IP only, or private IP address, whatever you want to call. So it's going to be using RFC 1918 standard. So using external IP address is not a big deal. You expose this IP address with an external IP address. On the on-prem, you expose it, have the communication established. It's going to work. There's no problem. But it's going to take a route of external route. It's over internet, not secure, very expensive. So all the complications comes into picture. But if you use services like this, cloud VPN, interconnect, or peering, I'm not a great fan of peering, so I'll talk about that later. So interconnect or cloud VPN is going to help you establish the connectivity between your on-prem and your GCP using RFC 1918 standard, folks. So the most important thing when you are communicating between these two networks is basically going to be IP overlap. You should make sure you avoid IP overlap. Okay, that's the most important thing, because two different networks, and the on-prem is going to be existing for a long time. So if overlap is going to exist, you have to be little accommodative and change it in GCP side. You cannot ask the team to change it in the on-prem side or in the other cloud, because they are running. You are provisioning it freshly here. You have the luxury of changing the IP range, but they may not have it. So because they created the network, VMs are running, so you cannot change the network all of a sudden. It's going to be a huge task. But for you in GCP, if you are establishing the connection, definitely you're going to create a new VPC subnetwork. You decide the CIDR range, the IP range, which is not going to overlap. Basically, that's very, very important. So the quick and the easy way to establish a connection between your on-prem and GCP or other cloud and GCP quickly. Now that there's a proof of concept which you need to show and you want to do quickly, the best and the easiest option is virtual private network, VPN. VPC, VPN, slightly confusing. So VPC is a broader picture there, virtual private cloud. The VPN is between, you set up a connection between two networks, private networks, but they communicate over public internet. The connection is going to be encrypted. And this is a very standard procedure which people do, and every network engineer knows this. At least once the network engineer would have set up this in his or her lifetime. So this is going to be done definitely by them. So, and please remember, this VPN is not the VPN which you use on your laptop. The one which you use on your laptop to connect your corporate network, or to connect to some website where you have to use a VPN, that is client VPN. So that is a client VPN. Please don't get confused with that VPN. This VPN is basically a site-to-site VPN, gateway to gateway VPN. It's between two data centers, basically. Okay, so this is not your client-side VPN. Remember that. So when it comes to VPN, right, it's battlefield tested. Every network engineer, as I mentioned, knows how to do this. So it is proven, it's going to work every time. And quickly I can make it up and running. You give me 30 minutes, I can set it up. So you have a proof of concept to show. If I get all the necessary details from the on-premise or from the other cloud, I can set it up quickly. I can do that. So the offering which Google provides is called as Cloud VPN. Just to differentiate, it is from the normal VPN. It's their own offering. You get two types of VPN support. Basically, one is called as Classic VPN. The other one is called as HA VPN. Based on that, your SLA is going to vary. If it's Classic VPN, it's going to be 3 nines of SLA. And if it's classic HA VPN, you are going to have basically 4 nines. And one important thing is, because it is over public internet is always going to have latency. The bandwidth constraint is going to be there. So the maximum bandwidth one tunnel can support is going to be 3 Gbps. It's not going to be beyond that. Now, if you want to transfer a huge amount of data from on-prem to GCP over internal IP address or internal network, and if you need something like 10 Gbps, for example, basically you need to have minimum 4 tunnels. More tunnels, more cost. So the bandwidth, so if it's a very lightweight communication you want to establish, then it is okay to use cloud VPN. But if it's little more data to be transferred, all those things, you get an offering from Google. Every cloud provider provides this. So in Google, it is called as interconnect. In AWS, it is called as direct connect. In Azure, it is called as express something like Azure Express route or something. Routes. So so it's the same concept. What it does is basically is it's a physical connection between your data center and GCP's data center in that city. You connect it, and it's like virtually a cable is connected, VNet, virtual cable, sorry, uh, VLAN, sorry, a virtual LAN is connected. You directly get into the Google's network in one hop. The moment the data leaves your on-prem data center, the next hop is going to be your Google's data center. So with this, what you get is you get a very high bandwidth support, high as minimum 10 Gbps. Minimum itself is 10 Gbps. You can get up to 200 Gbps, which is really massive. So which is really good. If it's a very large organization, people use dedicated interconnect to transfer huge amount of data regularly from on-prem to GCP. So, and you also have some options if you're not very close to Google's data center. How will you work? You work with a partner, so you get an offering called as a partner interconnect. So you get 2 flavors there. And the last one, not a great fan of that, and it's not a GCP product also, it's a Google product called as peering. The term is peering. Please don't get confused with your VPC network peering. So totally different products, but the term peering is the one which is going to confuse. So if you have, say, for example, some services which you want to communicate and don't want to spend huge amount of investment on this connectivity and all, you get an offering from Google called as peering, which is basically not leveraging the internal IP address, but you get a better bandwidth support. So usually, say for example, ad agencies, um, they who work on G Suite, now called as Google Workspace, that kind of stuff, or YouTube, and they want to have a communication between those services and GCP related stuffs, they try to use this part basically. So I'll try to show you some information on this peering, but this is not a Google GCP product as such. So you can go look into the console, you will look for GCP Cloud VPN, you will see Cloud Interconnect, but you will not see peering option there. So because it's a Google product basically. So what we will do now is we'll try to understand from the left. So we'll see how Cloud VPN works. Then we'll see how Cloud Interconnect works. And lastly, some slides on peering. So a typical VPN setup will look like this, where you have 2 networks on either side of it. And because it's VPN, it's going to be 2 different networks. One, it's going to be GCP. The other side is going to be something like on-prem or AWS or Azure. So you have basically your network 10.220.0.0/16. On the other side, you have the on-premise network, which are different CIDR range. Make sure the IPs are not overlapping. If it is overlapping, on-prem will not change it. You have to change your CIDR range in your GCP side because it's easier here, new. And I also assume the on-prem was existing for a longer time. So GCP just now they started exploring it. So you have the luxury of changing it. Now the communication between both the networks is going to be over public internet, but the connection is going to be encrypted. Standard VPN concept, it's going to be encrypted. And this is basically a two-tunnel VPN. So you can get up to something like 3 Gbps, sorry, 6 Gbps maximum. You can get up to 6 Gbps. And you need basically two things. A tunnel, that's the main thing. The other one is a gateway. So on both the sides. So you have a gateway and you have this gateway exposed with a external IP address. So only then from internet you can have the routes done. So you need to have basically a gateway and a tunnel. Minimum one tunnel is good enough. But if you want to have a redundancy, what if this one tunnel gets failed? So you want to have two tunnels usually. So that's a typical architecture which you get. This is usually called a site-to-site VPN, gateway-to-gateway VPN. Multiple people give it multiple names. So this is between two networks basically. It's not between one laptop and a server. That is your client VPN. So we are not discussing that. So if in your corporate laptop you will have Cisco VPN or Pulse Connect or Open VPN or Tunnel Bear kind of stuff, that's not the one which we are discussing. Please remember that. Okay, so this is a typical VPN structure which you have. So basically, if you were to do this, yourself, you need to have an on-prem or an AWS account or at least an Azure account, some other cloud. I would say as an individual like us, on-prem is going to be a little a nightmare. We may not get it. We may not get access to that itself. So it's going to be difficult. But AWS or Azure is going to be a good choice if you were to try it on. So create a VPC similar to what you have in GCP. In Azure, it is called as VNet. So in AWS, it should be called as virtual network only, if I'm not wrong. So you create a VM, all those things, and then do the same stuff. So you can do that. That's a good option if you have an Azure account or a AWS account. But since we don't have it, at least I don't have an Azure or a AWS account, what we are going to do is, let me take my highlighter. I'm not going to use this. I'm not going to use on-prem AWS or this thing, but rather I'll use a GCP account. I'll use a GCP network itself. So it's going to be GCP to GCP. Now you may ask, then it beats the purpose of a VPN, Mahesh, you may ask. But I would say, no, it's not going to beat the purpose. It's going to still serve the purpose. Between two GCP network, setting up a VPN tunnel is going to be a handy option. The reason is, if it is between two GCP networks, what's the best option you can think of, folks? Two GCP networks, you want to communicate each other. What would be the best option which you can think of? Or the simplest option which you can think of? Two GCP networks. I want to communicate using internal IP address. So internal IP, how will I do it? Peering. That's it. VPC network peering is going to help you out. But what was one drawback of VPC network peering? The biggest drawback of network peering, VPC network peering. Transitive. It's non-transitive in nature. So that non-transitive nature. So network A to B, B to C, but A to C is not going to be explicit. You have to explicitly peer it. But when it comes to cloud VPN, right, it is transitive in nature, meaning so if I have GCP network A they are communicated with Cloud VPN. The connection is established between Cloud VPN, between network B. Similarly, I have network B and network C, again connected using Cloud VPN. Then I don't need to have one more setup between A and C, can be communicated easily using internal IP address only. Using internal IP address itself, because Cloud VPN, the way it is done is Cloud VPN is transitive in nature. So only for this reason, people prefer sometimes Cloud VPN folks. They may prefer this. So what we are going to see is going to be little valid reason. Is going to be a valid reason. Could be a valid one, which we are going to do. With the limitations which we have, we are going to use this itself. Okay. So is there a question?
Yes, sir. So let's say
Yeah.
I have some VMs and I build this cloud VPN. Can I connect from my desktop to the VPN directly, like how you log in into your office? No, right?
That's the reason I mentioned it is, that's a client VPN what you're asking. No.
Yes. So how do we, so it external users access these boxes with one IP?
Okay, so there what you should do is basically this is between your GCP and your corporate network. So
Yeah,
your corporate network, yeah, what you should have done is basically you will have a cloud VPN setup. Now you will connect to your corporate network. You will connect using something like Cisco VPN or something. Cisco, there are some tools, right? So use that and connect it to log in. Assume you're in home, you're using your home Wi-Fi. Use your client, Cisco client or what, or Secure Pearls or Open VPN. Connect to your corporate network. From your corporate network, you can do a ping to your GCP using internal IP address. That's the option which you can use.
But there's no direct option for the external
No.
user to get into the public.
So you don't have, basically the basic thing is or you should have a gateway. You should have a gateway. Your laptop, you should have exposed one IP. You should have purchased an IP from the outside world or from the ISP provider. Use that IP address, do the stuff. So from your laptop directly going is not going to. And from your laptop, why do you need to have it? You have private Google access. You have IPA. Why do you need to have internal for just to communicate? Why do you need to do that? I can do it from here itself, right? With my identity aware proxy, I can do it. That's what we saw last week. So why do you want to have an expensive option? From your laptop.
Sorry. Complete.
So from your laptop, you don't have any transitive nature, anything required. So if it's only from your laptop, you want to connect using internal IP address, you have lots of options. Basically, identity aware proxy is a straightforward option. Just use that. That's it. Go ahead, Vivek. What's the one? You have a thought?
Yeah, a few days back, yeah, you might be remember that I have shared that with GCP has launched something support for SD-WAN, so tied to client. It's not from top, but if you want to access any services from client to as of now, site to client, cloud is there, but client to GCP is not there. So that SD-WAN have integrated something via SD-WAN, we can reach to cloud. If any partner want to connect that services, that I forgot that VPC service. I forgot the name which I have told you 2 or 3 weeks.
I remember. Yeah.
Support for SD-WAN. SD-WAN provide functionality that you can connect your multiple sites to the cloud. Yeah, but not from laptop. But if you want to expose any service, yeah.
From a server in your in your data center to connect, that you can do it. It could be a branch location, does not need to be a main data center. That is the one which you are mentioning, right? So I saw that. I
Support
also forgot that name.
Yeah.
I saw that slide also. There was an article also. So maybe I can show that Anil Kumar tomorrow. So, but from a client machine, you don't need to have that purpose, I would say. So your identity aware proxy can serve much better. Straightforward option, you can do that. Okay, so that's the reason why what we are not going to do is we are not going to have on-prem AWS or Azure. Is there a question?
One question actually. Somewhere
Yeah.
I saw a question, I didn't remember. During the migration phase, is it possible that we are aware that we cannot use overlap IPs? Is it possible that, let's say, an on-premises,
Secondary.
some alias IP? Is it possible
No,
to use
no, no.
primary
No,
IP?
so the IP overlap should not be happening either for primary or for secondary. Simple concept.
Yeah,
So overlap should never occur. Basically, that's a simple concept. So it does
actually,
not matter whether it's a primary or secondary.
okay. Question was like that. I just listen. Maybe I just want to put my thought.
I have seen the question.
Use primary IP and on premises, and this alias IP on the cloud side to do the migration. There was 4 options. There was one
Yeah.
confusing question like this. We can use a primary IP range on premises, and on cloud we can use migration with the secondary IP. I think that is wrong. That is
Yeah.
any kind. You
The
told me that.
secondary IP, yeah, it should not be basically, you cannot do it. You can also give a try. You can also give a try. How you can give a try is basically you create simple.
I think there is no route for that also towards cloud, maybe from on-premises to the cloud.
So what you can do, you can create something like this. You have this VPC, right? You create one more VPC, but make sure you keep the same secondary range. Try to peer it. It's going to throw an error. Try to peer it. So your primary may be different, but your secondaries are overlapping. The peering will not happen. So in that question, what they're trying to do is establish connectivity between internal IP only. So it's going to have a conflict. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. And the secondary IP range, which we create from using the Kubernetes on the fly, gets deleted when you delete the cluster. When you delete the cluster, if the cluster is not there, the secondary range also goes off. Just because I saw this, I thought of sharing it. But once if you create yourself a secondary range, it's going to be always there. So on the fly, the secondary range is going to be created automatically. When you delete the cluster, it's going to go off. And Vivek, to answer your question, it's not going to work because of the conflict. So conflict should not be there at the primary and should not be there at your secondary also. Okay. So now the explanation is going to give us an output something like this. So this is the demo which we are going to do, where we are going to have basically 2 projects, and please don't do it in one single project. So with your free tier account only, free trial account only, you can do this demonstration, but you need 2 projects. Why 2 projects? There's some quotas which is going to run short. So to avoid that, we are going to use 2 projects. So we have a limitation, we have a solution for that. So what we are going to do is basically we have 2 projects. So I'm going to make our batch 6 project as project 1. Let me just make it firstly. How do I make it? Just for our easy convenience purpose, change the setting, make it as project 1. This is my project 1. This is my project 1. I go to my network. This is my project 1 network. Then I have project 2. So this is not project 2. It's not showing it. Okay. You see this project 1? We are going to do a connectivity between VPC Taiwan, which is in project 1, which is our batch 6 project, with another VPC called as VPC Singapore, which is in another project called as project 2. And you see, first of all, the foremost thing, the IPs are not going to overlap, first of all. So that's the prerequisite. So project 1, project 2. So VPC Taiwan, VPC Singapore. What we will do basically is create a virtual machine in VPC using VPC Taiwan and using VPC Singapore, and we do a simple ping, standard way which we have been doing so far. We do a ping. Everybody knows it's not going to work because it's two different networks. One possible and quick easy solution is VPC network peering, but we have already learned it. Now we wanted to learn something new, which is cloud VPN, where we are going to set up a gateway, VPN gateway, which is going to be usually an external IP address. So we know how to work with an external IP address. We will see how to reserve an external IP address. After we reserve it, we will create a tunnel. We create a tunnel. So from Taiwan to Singapore, Singapore to Taiwan. So we create a tunnel. Basically, this is one tunnel. So, but you have to do the configuration on both the sides. You do the stuff, then the VM in VPC or in project 1 will be able to ping with VM in project 2 using internal IP address. This is what we are going to do in tomorrow's class. Because in 15 minutes I cannot do this demo. This is going to take around 45 minutes. We will see this part. And in this cloud VPN itself, we are going to explore basically two different styles of routing. And in cloud VPN only, we are going to explore more of the routing concepts. If you remember, we have never created a route by ourselves so far. We created firewall rules. We have created subnetwork by ourselves. Route, we never created it because most of the cases, like the default route was getting created. When we create VPC peering, the route was getting created, but we never created a route ourselves. We'll also see how we can create routes by ourselves and use it. We'll see that also, and that was the reason I kept creation of routing still not, we have not touched it. So that is something which we are going to do. So because there are going to be two types of routes which we are going to discuss. One is called as static route, the other one is called as dynamic routing. So two types of routing we are going to see in tomorrow's class. So tomorrow when we jump in, basically start the class, we have the projects already, we have the VPC already, and I'll also show you the firewall rules, folks. So if I just go to VPC Taiwan firewall rules, so put a filter on network VPC Taiwan firewall rule, open to the world, ping and ICMP. Similarly, VPC Singapore, go to firewall rules. Only one firewall rule because only one VPC, no VPC. So this is also open. Firewall rule wise, everything is open, very much open. So what we are going to do is we have project setup. Let me take my highlighter. So we have the project set here also set. VPC set, VPC is set, subnetwork is there, firewall rules is there. What you need to do is basically the gateway, which is going to be an external IP address that you have to do it, and the tunnel creation. And we'll create a tunnel and we'll establish the connectivity and we'll show the ping is working. And towards the end, we will use the test connectivity test tool, which we used last week to show VPC peering was using internal communication only. It was on Google network. But when we do cloud VPN, we will show that it is not on Google network. It is taking a route of public internet. That way our understanding becomes very, very crystal clear when to use what, basically. Okay, that's what we are going to do tomorrow. So it's going to be an interesting demonstration. So I'll stop it here, folks. We'll stop it early here. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer because in 15 minutes I cannot do this and I don't want to do the demo in bits and pieces.
Quick question, Mahesh. Let's say I have 4 VMs in my GCP, and I have one public IP, and I want to use that one public IP to get to the 4 machines. Okay, let's say first machine is 1000, the port I'm using. Second machine is 2000. Third machine is 3000. Fourth machine is 4000. If I say from my PuTTY, from my local desktop outside the GCP, right? The IP address of my public IP :1000, it should go to the first VM. If I say :4000, it should go to the fourth VM.
So 1000, when you mention, it's the port number or the IP address you're saying? It's a port. Hello.
It's a port. Yes.
Port. It's a port.
Yes. So if you see here in the picture,
yeah,
right, Google Compute Engine Network, the internal 3 green. Let's say these 3 are VMs. Okay. And let's say this orange color or whatever the red color you have, Bastion host. Instead of that, I have a public IP here.
Yes, 146.148. Yeah.
Yeah. So this one, right? If I say :1000, it should go to the first internal, 2000 to the second internal, and then third internal, 3000. How do we make it to happen? It's kind of like use the public IP to get to the Google network and port forward from there.
Yeah. So port forwarding is what you would use. So here, if I don't know whether I don't have PuTTY here. Okay, let me get my PuTTY. It should be program files, Google. So in PuTTY you can do port forwarding, right? So
yeah, I can do, but the public IP address on the GCP should point to the first 1000, meaning it should go to the first VM. 2000, it should forward to the second, 3000, third VM.
Okay, 1 minute. I have drawn something very similar. Let me show whether I can get my PuTTY here. In PuTTY itself, I have tried it once. So in PuTTY, right? Or maybe 1 minute. Let me. I have a video there which I had done. Let me share that. So here I had something very similar. So let me first show you the context here. So let me see whether this is going to make sense. 1 minute. Let's. Okay. Okay. What I do basically here is I have a Cloud SQL instance with only internal IP address, which is in GCP. So then I create a virtual machine in the same network with internal IP only. So it's going to be looking like it's going to look like something like this. I don't have an internal IP as external IP. I only have internal IP address. Now, what I do is from my local machine, I'm going to use basically port. I use this concept. So -L. So what I do is from my local machine. So I'm going to use gcloud command, which is going to again behind the scene going to use putty. So I do this port forwarding. So from my local machine, I'm going to use 8080, which is going to go basically, sorry, what I do is I connect to this virtual machine. So from this virtual machine, I do a port forwarding 8080 to this IP address. This IP address is nothing but my Cloud SQL instance IP address. So this way, if I show you the putty command, I will show you how it's going to work. So am I playing it? I stopped it. Okay, I'm in my local machine. This is command prompt. So I'm in my local machine. I do the port forwarding. So let me just show you. So when I hit enter, it should open up putty, and I can also see the port forwarding happening in putty. So I'll show you that also. It entered. The putty screen opens up. And if I will make it right click and look into, okay, I'm increasing the font. So when I go to event logs, right, I can see it's going to forward, doing a port forwarding from my local machine. Port 8080 is going to be forwarded to a Cloud SQL instance, which is 3306. Now what I do is I basically connect to that MySQL instance using port 8080 from my local laptop, and I will be able to connect it. So the same thing which you mentioned, port forwarding, should be able to help you out in this case. Use this command and it should work, but not sure what was the challenge there which you were facing. So port forwarding is the answer actually for this. I have seen this working. So what was that something which was not, which you tried it or you did not try it? It works. I have tried it in one of the organization also, but specifically not like VM, but as a normal, like a Cloud SQL instance. So if it's a VM also, it should work. Specifically a port you. Now what you are doing is, instead of 3306, which is the MySQL port, it's going to be your port 22. So meaning, if you come here, it should be something like, if I use this. So 142, so I want to connect. I don't need an external IP address also, basically, but if you still need it, so what you do here is you connect it, but in your local machine. So make sure something like 8080, you do a forward to your this thing, something like the one which was showing. Okay, from here you want to connect to another VM. From this you want to connect it. You want to use port. Any specific reason why this port is used, Anil? Any specific reason?
Just it can be, one can be for web 8080, one can be 6443, or one can be 2376 for Kubernetes. So
port forwarding is the option. I'll try it and show you tomorrow. So I'm sure that it's going to work. So what I will do is I'll try to do. Let me know whether this helps you out. So I'll have one VM in my GCP. It's going to have an IP address, something like this. and I have another VM2, which is 172.16.1.100, something like this. And I have my laptop, where from my laptop I can only connect to VM1, but I should have something. What is that magic box, whatever it is? So, but I should be able to access VM2. Would that serve your purpose? From my laptop only, would that serve it? I don't literally connect to VM2, but I would have put a firewall rule, something like only the request comes from VM1, I'm going to allow you. Even if you know my details from laptop, I'll not allow you. So with the port forwarding option, maybe there's an application running on port 8080 or something. You want to access it from the laptop, right?
Okay,
Something of
let's
that
try
sort.
that use case. Right.
Yeah, I'll try it and let you know. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
And the other thing, when you are posting the videos, the videos are numbered as a class numbers. It doesn't go by topics.
Okay. But it does not go. It basically okay. Okay, what you are saying.
So
So
let's say today you taught us about this
yeah,
cloud VPN, cloud connect, interconnects,
yeah,
right? And then virtual machine
yeah,
intercommunications and number of NICs on the VMs, right?
yeah.
So that way, if you put the heading as that instead of class number, that could be very helpful, because let's say I have a question about Kubernetes tomorrow. I have to go through all the videos, each class, and then I have to find which video reflects that what is required for my Kubernetes.
1 minute. So 1 minute. I got your stuff. Let me share my screen once again. There's my screen sharing. So let me share my screen back. So I put a topic name there, so I'm not sure was that not helpful. So this is your batch 6 only. So if you see, right, batch, I put day and I also put what was the topic which was conveyed there. What was the stuff which we learned? So I put that.
Okay.
So I like the last one, we learned VPC peering, private Google access, service access, Google Cloud IAP. So both the stuffs I put, and I have a limitation of only 100 characters there. So I use that to put all the stuff there. So you can search.
No worries.
Yeah,
That's fine. And can we download these videos or no way?
You can. Officially, you should not download from YouTube. It's nothing. I don't have any restriction. If you have a tool, go ahead and download it and keep it. Your choice. I have no restriction. You have paid the money. I have no concern. So if you want to download it, you can download it. So
but
your
is
choice.
there any way you can dump it into a bucket where we can download?
If I dump it into bucket, right, it's going to cost me to dump it. That's the only reason. So each video is going to be roughly around 400 MB. So 400 into this thing. So it's going to be huge. So that's the reason I did not want to dump it into a bucket or initially I used to dump it into Google Drive. The Google Drive was getting exhausted very quickly. Then I thought, okay, anyway, I have a YouTube this thing. So this is going to be free. And the big advantage is if it is in a YouTube, right? The big advantage, you are not going to, no, not anybody. No, it's private. Only 10 people of you can only it's a private one. The advantage which I saw with private YouTube is, or the YouTube itself is, you can play it on your TV. If you have a Chromecast or anything, modern TV, you can play it there. But if you put it in a Google Cloud storage bucket or your Google Drive, it's not going to play. It's not going to play and it's going to consume. And you need to keep a copy in your local system. Means when your local system crashes, who knows? So you lose everything. So I thought,
The only reason I asked for that, right, downloading is I travel a lot.
Okay.
When I'm on the
Okay, what I can do is, if you have a Google Drive more than 15 GB, send me a share it with me. I'll just upload it. In the
How much
past,
space you want?
okay, one video is
400,
basically
right?
400 MB. So 400. So I
Fine.
guess your minimum. So you need to have at least 220. It's going to be more than 30 videos. Currently we are in 23rd. Into minimum 300 also if you put, it's going to be 7 gig, 7 into. So 15 should be okay. So have a free tier, a free Gmail account with this thing. Share it. I'll upload it. I have no problem. I can upload it.
Okay, thank you very much. Really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Any other questions, folks?
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Right. Have a nice day. Bye.
You too. You too. Any other questions, folks? Okay. Looks like people are dropping off. All right, folks, we'll stop it here. So when I'll send the recording quickly today because few of them were not there. So I'll send the recordings quickly. Okay. Thank you, folks. See you tomorrow on Cloud VPN demo. Thank you. Bye.